The Queen's Gambit declined. This is one of the oldest responses to d4. All of the world champions that you know have played this opening. It's one of the most solid ways to play against d4. I'm going to be walking you through from 500 to 2000, showing you all the opening moves, middle game plans, end game plans on how to use this opening. Everything that you need to know is in this video. Watch till the end and watch your ratings go through the roof. Picking things off in the 500 region, pawn to d4 was played. Let's play pawn to d5. And in today's video, we're going to be declining the queen's gambit. So this is the queen's gambit. If we take the pawn, this is the queen's gambit accepted. If we play e6, this is the queen's gambit declined. And this is what I'm going to be explaining to you guys throughout the entire video. Oh, he plays b3. Maybe he thinks his pawn is about to die, but you wouldn't play the Queen's Gambit if you were afraid of losing the pawn. But the first idea when you play the Queen's Gambit decline is get castled in 5 moves, 6 moves max. So we're going to play the move knight to f6. We're 3 moves in, and the plan is to play bishop e7 followed by castle. So it's very, very solid opening. The first thing you do is you deal with your kingside pieces, get your king out the center. Now you will never have to worry about getting checkmated in the center of the board. Knight to f3 was played. He's developing his pieces now, which is good, but let's continue with our plan. We want to get castled in 5 move so that we take step 1 out the way. And then after we take step 1 out the way, I'm going to be telling you guys about step 2, which is after we develop our king side pieces, we start focusing on developing our queen side pieces. Pawn to e3 was played. It is usually more aggressive to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain. A move like pawn e3 definitely locks in the bishop. It's not a terrible move though, but you should feel better if your bishop is not blocked in. I know that I'm saying it and my bishop is blocked in, but that's one of the key ideas in the King's Indian defense. Well, that's one of the key ideas in the Queen's Gambit. So now we take the pawn, and basically, if they ever take on d5, the whole idea is our e pawn is able to take, and now our bishop is fine again. And throughout the video, I'm going to be teaching you guys what happens if they don't take on d5 and they try to keep your light squared bishop blocked in. So knight to c3 was played. He is still developing his pieces. Our king is castled. We develop the king side minor pieces. Let's start focusing on the queen side pieces. So first thing I'm going to do is develop my bishop, pinning the knight to the queen. Now, throughout the video, one thing that I'm going to be teaching you guys is whenever you're going to be moving your bishop on c8, whether to f5 or g4, you want to ensure that you're on the lookout for this queen to b3 move attacking b7. But queen to b3 is not possible here because the pawn is not on b2. So developing the bishop is perfectly playable. He plays bishop e2. He's basically trying to break the pin. So now I'm going to play the move knight to knight d7 is good. Knight c6, bishop d6, a6 is all good. I'm also thinking of playing bishop to b4 just to pin the knight, but bishop to d2 and he will be fine. Well, a move that we're always going to play is pawn to c6. So just because I'm trying to remain flexible, I'm going to play the move pawn to d6. Like the knight usually definitely belongs on d7 though, and the rook on f8 belongs on e8 on this open file. So he decided to castle the king. Now I'll play the move knight to d7, just finishing my development. So we managed to finish the development of our king side pieces and our queen side pieces. He plays h3 to hit the bishop. I mean, we don't necessarily want to be giving up our bishops for knight. So let's just pull the bishop back to h5. And one more very important idea that I want you guys to keep in mind when playing the QGD, yes, that's what it's called, is you want to trade off both pairs of bishops. If you're able to trade off both pairs of bishops, then the position will favor black, or it's just going to be easier for black to play than white to play. And then another important idea that I want you guys when it comes to the QGD is a knight on d6 is usually always good. So if you could find some ways like knight e8 or knight to d6 to just get your knight on the d6 square, then your knight is going to be doing a lot of good work. He plays g4, which is definitely a mistake. You don't necessarily want to be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on, but let's just pull the bishop back. And then he plays the move knight to e5, which is very aggressive, by the way. This knight e5 move is definitely one of those moves that you want to ensure that you're on the lookout for a move like that. But he's trying to take my bishop. I don't want to really move the bishop, and then he plays f3. So let's just play the move bishop to d6, applying some pressure to his knight. He still haven't developed his dark squared bishop. So I'm trying to claim that I have a little lead in development. Pawn to f4 is a very strong move, by the way, but I have a very cool idea to play against this. Basically, he wants to play pawn to f5 and trap my bishop. But because his knight is unprotected on c3, I'm able to get away with the move knight to e4, attacking the unprotected knight. And if the knight takes, my bishop is going to be very strong on e4, and f5 does not trap my bishop. Now, a general chess rule that I want you guys to keep in mind is we do not push pawns on the side our king is on. So even though this looks very aggressive here, if he doesn't know what he's doing, he could be getting checkmated. Come on, bro. You were playing so well. Why would you put your queen on d2? That's a queen. That's crazy. Okay, I mean, I guess that's what happens at the 500 level. You play a few good moves and then you just make one of those horrible blunders. But the goal from here is to just start trading pieces off the board. I'm thinking of playing the move queen to h5 first, though. Queen h5, he takes the knight, I check king over, and he's not going to be getting checkmated. So if I really want this to work, what do I need to do? I mean, I think we just need to trade pieces off the board, to be honest. Yeah, let's just go bishop e4. Bishop e4, his knight should be able to take, but I'll just take back. Otherwise, I would like to play queen to h4, followed by queen to g6. That would just be a checkmate, but he just blundered. It happens at the 500 level, though. We're going to be seeing higher quality chess when we hit 700, 800. So he took, let's just take back. Generally, it's not good to trade when you're down in material, but my bishop was actually super strong. Like his king could have gotten checkmated because of that bishop. No, I'm just going to keep trading the pieces off the board. And now that he plays the move pawn to d5, that's another mistake. It's more like a counting mistake or a drawback mistake. It's more like a drawback mistake. Because if you notice, he had two pawns protecting the knight, and I had two pieces guarding the knight. Moving the pawn from e4 to d5 means there's only one piece guarding the knight. So now I'm able to take, and we're winning a pawn. This is called the drawback mistake, by the way. And this is like one of the very popular ways that persons blunder. Let's take on e5, hit the rook, and if I'm able to, okay, he did not guard his rook. I can take the rook, but because I have such a lead in material, I'm actually going for a checkmate here. So let's go with queen to h4 with the idea of playing queen to g3 or queen takes h3. And I'm going to try to use my bishop and my queen to deliver the checkmate. And again, we know that the threat is better than the execution. So we're also attacking his rook. Not only are we attacking his rook, but we're also threatening all of these aggressive ideas. So he's in a lot of trouble here. He pulls the bishop back. Let's just take on h3. And, again, this is why you don't really push pawns on the side that your king is on. It may look as if you're doing a pawn storm, but you don't do a pawn storm when your king is on that side. Now I'm trying to find some checkmating idea. Like, again, that's a rook. I'm trying to check here, but then the king runs here. Okay, this is checkmate in three moves. Unless the king runs here, then it's also checkmate in one, two. Then it's checkmate in four moves. But hopefully you're able to find this checkmate. But it starts by playing the move bishop to h2. If the king goes here, queen to g3 checks. The king is forced to go to f1, and then queen g1 is a checkmate. If the queen goes here, bishop back to g3 check, forcing the king to g1, and queen h2 followed by queen h1 would have been a checkmate. Because the king goes here, we check, forcing the opponent's king to move to f1, and that's just a checkmate. More QGD against 600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600. D4 was played. Let's just play D5. It's a very, very simple setup. Now, my opponent decided to play knight to F3 here. Maybe he's going to be going with a London, but we're always going to be using our simple setup. We play knight to F6. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is we want to get our king out the center of the board. So after knight C3, we play E6. And whenever you play this E6 move, you need to play E6 being aware that you're blocking out your bishop. If you're not aware that you're blocking out your bishop, then E6 is a bad move. He develops his bishop to g5. Let's go bishop to e7, and we're going to be simply castling our king. So the whole idea is by move 5, move 6 latest, you want to ensure that your king is already out the center of the board, so that way you could focus on your queen side piece. So e3, we get the king out the center of the board. We get the king side out of the way. Now we're going to be focusing on the queen side. Now, bishop to d3 was played. Very, very strong bishop. Now, this is also a very key and thematic idea that I want you guys not to just keep in mind when it comes to this opening, but in general. Whenever we have a bad bishop, which is blocked in by our own pawns, and the opponent has a good bishop, which is like pointing towards our king, what should we do? We need to find a way to exchange our bad bishop for the opponent's good bishop. So we're going to be playing the move pawn to b6 in this position. The whole idea is we're trying to play the move bishop to a6. Now, let's say the opponent plays queen to e2, because you're going to be seeing moves like queen e2, preventing bishop a6. If they play queen e2, preventing us from playing bishop a6, which he did, you could actually just put the bishop on b7. Now, if you really want to trade the bishop, you could play pawn a5 and bishop a6, but putting the bishop on b7, we also get the chance of controlling the e4 square. So you could still say this bishop is bad, quote unquote, but it's a very useful bishop, because the only way for white to make a plan is to do a pawn break. And the moment this pawn comes to e4, our bishop is active again. Also, it is opposite side castles. He's going to attack me. I'm going to attack him. Let's finish our development with knight d7. So pay attention to this setup, because you're going to be seeing it a lot in your game. A bishop on b7, the bishop on e7, the two knights protecting each other, and then our major pieces on the background. I say this a lot, but once we get the minor pieces off, it's time to get the major pieces in. C5 is the thematic break that you're going to play. You cannot play this without playing c5. Now, the opponent plays the move knight e5, and as I said before, it will be an aggressive game. If I take on e5, he takes on e5, my knight is already under attack. I have to pull it back, hit the pawn, he trades. I don't really gain much from that, so let's try to focus on our attack, because his attack is coming. So let's play the thematic pawn to c5. And once we play c5, it will allow us to open the c file. And once the c file is open, we could attack there. Now the opponent decided to take on d7. It's not a bad move. I mean, I could take with the knight and trade the bishops if I want. I could also just take with the queen. Like, both of these are just fine moves. It's a matter of preference. Now, because I am trying to be principled, I'm actually going to take with the queen, so that way my rooks are connected. And this is a sign. This is what I want you guys to see. Your king and your two rooks. Those are the only two pieces that should be on the back rank. That's how you know that your development is complete. My opponent is also doing the same. His king and his two rooks, only pieces on the back rank. Now my opponent decided to play pawn to b3, which is an interesting move, but it's definitely a mistake. If you go back, I was actually threatening to trap his bishop and win his bishop. So he plays b3 to guard the bishop. However, this is actually a drawback mistake that I'm not able to exploit immediately. But for one, his knight is an unprotected piece. Two, you do not just push pawns on the side that your king is on for no reason. It would have been better for him to move the queen, so that way he's able to move the bishop. So what I'm thinking of here is two things. Do I just play c4 anyways, and then after takes, bishop takes? Yes, he's ahead by a pawn, but my bishop gets this long diagonal, and I get access to the c file. Or do I play the more principled move? Okay, which one of the rook do I put on c8? That's the thing. I'm trying to. If I put this rook on c8, then what do we do with this rook? Do we use it as a defensive piece? Or if I put this rook on c8, then I'm able to use both of these rooks as an attacking piece. But then my king side is not going to be the safest, so I have to go all out attack, basically. But I'm actually going to be using the f rook. Now, it's very important that you guys decide which rook to use. Sometimes, based on the position, it's best to use the f rook. Sometimes it's best to use the a rook. Also, I'm putting my rook on the same file as the unprotected knight. This is called an X-ray, by the way. If you want to be a good chess player, you have to have good X-ray vision. And this is something I see a lot. You don't want to just see your bishop doing this. You want to see your bishop doing this. We also need to be aware that his rook is on the same line as the queen. Don't just look on the rook as, oh, rook is not doing much. I mean, the bishop is there, the pawn is there, my pawn is there. That's not how chess works. Because after a few trades happen, maybe three, four, five move down the line, just because the rook is on the same line as the queen, or my rook is on the same line as his knight, something could happen. Then now he plays king to b2. My opponent is actually playing pretty well. Like, he's actually seeing my threats, which is nice. So he guards the unprotected knight. Now I'm thinking again, do I take stakes? My rook is on the file. Definitely not going to be sacrificing. Or do I push takes, takes, bishop takes? My rook is still on the file. I mean, I could attack the bishop, but oh, oh, I think I have an idea here. Push takes, 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 queen to c7. Now I have two pieces attacking the bishop. He has one piece guarding the bishop. And if he moves the bishop away, his knight is only going to be attacked. Well, his knight is going to be defense once, and I'm going to be attacking it twice. So we're actually going to be going with the c4 idea. And this is the reason why the threat is better than the execution, because I could have actually played c4 before, but now playing c4 could win me a piece if the opponent does not defend well. For example, after takes, 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 bishop takes, queen c7, he could also play the move king to b3. So let's just take. And if he puts the king on b3 to guard, well, okay, he's actually, okay, he did take queen c7, two attackers, one defender. The move that I just talked about was king to b3. Will he play king to b3? That's the thing. I want you guys to keep in mind that this bishop is actually pinned to losing the knight. And I think king to b3 is the only move that doesn't outright lose the game. He did find king to b3. So we could say the opponent is defending very well, but is he? Like, do you want to have your king on b3? This has to be GG's. Now, this is something that I tell my students a lot, and please just listen to this. We're trying to attack someone's king. If you're trying to attack someone's king, I want you to try to put one of your pieces. The heavier the piece, the better it is. How can we put a piece so close to the opponent's king where the opponent could actually take that piece? For example, if I could get my queen on this b4 square, he could try to take the queen, but he couldn't. That's how close we want to get our queen, which is why I'm going to hit him with the move queen to d6. Once I hit him with queen to d6, I'm not only threatening a checkmate on b4, I'm also threatening a checkmate on a3. Now, personally, I'm not seeing how he's going to defend the mate, but sometimes there's some magical move that I'm not seeing. But let's see what he does here. And again, I want you guys to, this light squared bishop, if you don't understand this opening, you will have issues with your light squared bishop. So for every single game that we go through along this series, I want you to plan ahead and think about, based on the position, how will Akeem try to improve or try to make his light squared bishop good in this position? Knight back to b1 was played. So he basically pulled the knight back to b1, preventing my queen from going to the a3 square. But he did not prevent my queen from going to the b4 square, which means that's just a checkmate. More Queen's Gambit declined against 700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 700. Before we play d5, and then he plays c4. This is called the Queen's Gambit. We play e6. This is called the Queen's Gambit declined. And it's a very simple and solid way to play with the black pieces. Knight to f3, we play the move knight f6 with the whole idea of castling our king in 5 moves. Now, I've never seen knight to a3, to be honest. Maybe he's afraid of losing the c pawn, but the C pawn is never just going to be taken for free. So let's just continue with our idea. I mean, he could keep his knight on the edge of the board all he wants. I'm just going to be castling my king. Now he plays pawn e3. Let's get the king out the center of the board. And now that I castle my king, the plan from here is to develop my queenside pieces. Let's just play pawn to c6 here. This little pawn triangle, you guys should be very familiar with it. And now it's actually a bit tricky because the whole idea is to take on c4. But if I take on c4, his knight automatically comes off the edge of the board. So I'm actually going to be using a different way to get my light squared bishop in the game. First, let me just develop my knight, and then after which I'm going to be showing you guys how I'm going to be getting my light squared bishop in the game. So it's very important that you guys know all the ways to get the light squared bishop in. Now, usually I take on c4, and after the bishop takes, I play b5. But me taking on c4 would be a mistake because I help his knight to move towards the center of the board, and his knight is already on the edge. So I'm just going to be playing the move pawn to b6 here, and then I'm going to be playing the move bishop to b7, and then eventually I'm going to be playing the move pawn c5, and then my bishop will be active. Knight to g5, he's trying to be very aggressive. He now has 1, 2, three pieces attacking my h7 pawn. I only have two pieces guarding, so we're just going to be playing pawn to h6 to attacking the knight. Now the knight has to just go back. I mean, he could play knight h7, but I could just move my rook, to be honest. The knight really doesn't do anything on h7, and that's what he went for. Now, I could take the knight and then he checks and then I move my king, but let's just move the rook in one move. Now he's just doing too much work with his knight. Knight, 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 and I only moved my knight once. So let's just take on f6 here, and from here I'm going to be playing, it's either bishop to a6 or bishop to b7, by the way, because if I'm able to play bishop to a6, I could also trade my bishop for his bishop. So he plays pawn f3. Looks like he wants to play pawn to e4 next. If I play bishop a6, he has queen a4. I takes, knight takes, takes. Let's just play bishop to b7. The bishop is still not yet activated, by the way. This bishop is only activated once I clear the diagonal. I still don't want to take here though because it helps the knight to join the game. I'm going to start by playing the move pawn to c5. Now, all I need to do is eventually take on c4 and then my bishop gets the diagonal. But I'm not going to be taking on c4 unless I'm either winning a pawn or he does something with this knight. So he took on c5. I could take with my bishop, but pawn b4 could be annoying. So let's just take back with the pawn here. And then he takes on d5 again. I could take with the bishop and I'm fine, but I'm going to be taking with the pawn. These are called hanging pawns, by the way. Whenever you have two pawns beside each other like that, and there's a file here and there's a file here, those are actually called hanging pawns. It's actually very aggressive if you know what to do, but if you don't know what to do, you could find yourself in trouble. The bishop is attacking my rook. That's a bit annoying, to be honest, because now I have to move my rook to f8. Eventually, I should be able to just chase away his bishop. For example, after rook d1, I play a6, chase away the bishop. His rook is on the same line as my queen, so I need to get my queen off that. I mean, it doesn't really affect me now. I'm thinking about d4, thinking about just getting my rook back here. But let me just get my rook in the game. Let me put my rook on the same line as his queen, since his rook is on the same line as my queen. But eventually, I need to ensure that I get my queen off the same line as his rook. So he plays queen to b3. He got his queen off the same line and he attacks my bishop at the same time. So I'm going to get my queen off the same line as his rook and protect my bishop at the same time. Now, this rook on f8 is the only piece that is not really doing much. So rook to d8 should be my next move. And then all my pieces are going to be doing something. His knight is still on the edge of the board, not doing anything. So I'm very happy about that. Queen to a4, he's attacking my pawn on a6 twice. First of all, that pawn is poisoned because if he takes rook to a8 could win the bishop. Maybe he's trying to play bishop to a5 and attack my queen, but offense is still the best defense. So let's play bishop to d6. This is called a battery, by the way, two pieces doing the same role on the same line, attacking his pawn on h2. So now he has to guard the pawn. He also has to be very careful how he guards the pawn. If he plays g3, we're definitely sacking the bishop. Okay, he plays f4. Not a bad move. Now I need to get my rook in the game. The only piece that's not doing anything. I'm also, let me just get the rook in the game first and put it on the same line as this unprotected bishop. And as we spoke about, he did take on a6, but we also said that pawn was poisoned. So because I'm attacking his bishop, I'm going to play the move rook to a8, and now I'm pinning the bishop to the queen. I'm now attacking the bishop twice, which he's only guarding once. He plays the move knight to b5, which forks my queen and my bishop. Doesn't help though, because once I move my queen to e7, I'm still attacking his bishop twice. Maybe he takes my bishop. I'm just going to be taking back. I'm still going to be taking his bishop on a6. So just like that, we won the opponent's bishop. So he took on d6. Let's take with the queen. Then he plays queen to b5. Maybe he thinks I'm going to take with the rook and then he takes my bishop, but let's just take with the bishop and attack his queen. Now it's just GG's. He has to move his queen. My knight is going to get access to this very nice outpost. Yeah, it's just winning for me here. Queen to b6 was played. I'm thinking of playing rook to b8 to attack the queen. But first, let's play the move knight e4 just to optimize all our pieces. I'm thinking of playing the move bishop to b7 eventually. Can't put the bishop there now because I want to be setting up some checkmates on his g2 pawn. Now he plays rook to c1, and we should be winning some material. Maybe not though, but bishop to e2 is just a very nice idea. Like, because it's like a removing the guard tactic. Bishop e2, the rook goes to e1, grab the bishop, hit the queen, and then, I mean, he's able to move the queen though, and then I'm going to be losing one of my pieces. So I don't think it's worth it. Let's just play pawn to d4. If he takes on d4, I could play queen takes d4 with check, just to open up as much lines pointing towards his king. And, he blocks with the bishop. I move my queen. And then eventually I should be able to attack his king and deliver some checkmates. He decided to play a4 instead. He's basically saying if I take his pawn, his bishop takes. So let's just get rid of the bishop first. Now, he is still able to take with the rook because if I take the pawn, his queen is going to take. And then once I take, I lose my queen. With that being said, let's play rook to b8 first. Let's attack the queen. This is called removing the guard. I'm trying to chase away his queen from guarding the e3 pawn. And then once the queen moves, my rook takes on e3. So he moves the queen. Okay, he is attacking this pawn though. So it may be a trade, but this pawn is also guarding this pawn. So if I take on e3, once the queen takes on c5, there will be nothing guarding his pawn on f4. Oh boy, he plays rook to e2. Maybe he thinks it's a trade, but he didn't see that my bishop was guarding it. So let's just take. Maybe he even lose it. Okay, now he sees. It's just GG's now. He blundered his rook. I'm going to take on f4, play queen f2, and then checkmate him on g2. And then he plays rook f1 to protect the f4 pawn, which means he's blundering his queen on c2. This is just GG's. Then he plays b3, which means he's blundering his rook on f1. The guy decided to give me everything, and now it's just going to be a checkmate on the next move. Really doesn't matter where he puts his king. That's just a checkmate. More QGD against 800 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 800. We're going to be playing some QGD. This is the Queen's Gambit. E6 declines the Queen's Gambit. And after pawn takes, we just need to take back with the pawn. Usually the only issue we have in the Queen's Gambit is this light squared bishop, but now we're able to develop our light squared bishop very, very easily. So it's just a matter of development from here. He developed his knight, we develop our knight. The goal is usually to get castle in 5 moves, but if they take on d5, we have to take back. So we're going to be trying to get castled in 6 moves. And bishop to f4 was played. If I play bishop e7, he will be able to play knight to b5, which it's not really threatening, but it's not something that I'm trying to allow. With that being said, let's just play bishop to d6. I'm still trying to castle on the next move. If he takes, then I'm just going to take with the queen and still not afraid of any knight to b5. So we're playing against Eric from the US, representing his fellow 800 level players. He plays knight to h3. He's basically saying, I'm not going to take because to take is a mistake. If you take, then my knight is going to take. Now, I think I'm just going to castle in this position because if I try to take his knight saying, okay, I'm doing a removing the guard tactic, he's going to just take on d6 first, and in between move. So let me just get my knight. Well, let me just get my king castled. His knight is on the edge of the board. If he takes, then his knight remains on the edge of the board. And remember what the rule about the knight on the edge of the board states. For one, you don't want to have your knights on the edge of the board. Two, if you have to put your knight on the edge of the board, ensuring that you're moving the knight off the edge of the board as quickly as you can. So he took on d6. Now we take with the queen. We have 2 more pieces that needs development. His king is still in the center of the board, so he has to be super careful. And I'm trying to open the center, but if I'm trying to open the center, then I must play something like pawn to c5. He plays queen to d3, could be a sign that he wants to castle on the queen side. So because his king is in the center and I want to open the center, we're going to be hitting him with pawn to c5. If he takes, then the queen takes. I have an isolated pawn. But keep in mind, there's one rule about the isolated pawn that I want you guys to keep in mind. If you have an isolated pawn, but you have a lead in development, then it means you have some very good activity. And the isolated pawn doesn't matter very well. He plays knight g5. not threatening a checkmate, by the way, because my knight covers the h7 square. So let's just take on d4 in this position. I'm attacking the knight, which means he has to take back with his queen. And then once he takes with his queen, he's going to be helping me to develop my pieces because I'm going to be developing my knight and I'm going to be gaining a tempo on his queen. Definitely not how you want to be playing the queen's gambit. Well, definitely not how you want to be playing the queen's gambit. Okay, that's not bad. Knight b5 is not bad. Luckily, I have a very nice move where he's attacking my queen. We know that offense is still the best defense. So instead of just pulling the queen somewhere where we're scared, there's two things that I'm thinking of. Either we play the move queen to f4 and attack the unprotected knight, or we play the move queen to b4, checking the opponent's king, preventing the king from castling. Because if he blocks with the queen, he loses the knight. And if he moves the king, he's not able to get castled. The thing is, like, if I play queen f4, he is able to play h4 and protect the knight. So let's just play queen to b4 and check the king. The king now has to go to d1, and we basically got exactly what we wanted. From here, it's just development. King to d1, that's a free pawn, by the way, but rook to b1 hits the queen. Yes, that's another free pawn, but let's not be too greedy. Let's finish our development first. And I'm developing my knight and I'm protecting my pawn anyways, and I'm still ahead by a pawn. I'm also thinking of bishop f5, and if the queen takes, I take the knight. But I'm leaning more towards taking on b2 next. I just want to ensure that I complete my development. On to e3, very interesting move. I'm thinking of playing knight e4, knight takes e4, pawn takes e4, queen takes e4. Like anything to just open the position. That's still a free pawn, still attacks his rook. If the rook move, I'm now able to take on f2. I was also about to say I'm thinking of knight g4, but I would be getting checkmated. So we're not thinking about that move. Okay, why not just h6 though? H6 hits the knight, knight goes back, then we play knight e4, threatening the royal fork on f2. Yeah, let's go with that idea. Let's play h6. I mean, there are pieces on our half of the board anyways, and we know about the neutralization principle, which states if a piece is on your half of the board, it's very important that you get that piece off the board so that way you don't play moves like knight g4 and forget about your h7 pawn hanging. But I know that my subscribers don't fall for drawback type mistakes because I've been drilling that thing in you guys' ears for weeks. So he pulls his knight back to f3. Now we play the move knight e4. We're threatening a royal fork on f2. So he has to defend f2. I'm thinking about taking on e3 followed by a6, but I'm just trying to complete my development here, to be honest. Like, I don't really have a lot of intention of trying to win pawns because his king is in the center of the board. So I'm more focused on finishing my development so that way all my pieces are active, which means it will be easier for me to attack his king. King to c2. The guy played king c2. Maybe he's trying to guard b2, but that's just a fork, my G. That's just a fork. It's funny because even bishop to f5 here is good because it puts the bishop on the same line as the king. Okay, there's so many ways to win this game. Let's play the more principled knight takes f2. I mean, it wins us material, so let's just take the material. I'm also assuming that he's going to try to trade the queens off the board. If he trades the queens off the board, then it's just a confirmed loss, basically. But the moment he moves the queen is not going to be the moment where I take the rook. Because his king is on a light square and I have the light squared bishop that is yet to be developed, I'm going to play the move bishop to f5, checking the king first, just so I get one more free extra tempo, then I may take his rook. So he decided to play pawn to a3, counter-attacking my queen. He's basically saying, you take my queen, I take your queen. But that's not how it works, bro. Because your queen is still under attack. All I need to do now is look for a check with my queen. And then you're going to lose your queen once I find a check. And the check is right here. Now your king is in check. Your queen is under attack. You're not able to block the check with the queen. So you have to move the king out the way. And I'm just going to take your queen and win the game, which is why he resigned. But more QGD against 900 players. Stick around. My opponent is now 900. D4 was played. We're going to be playing D5 for some QGD action. He plays C4. Let's play pawn to E6. This is the Queen's Gambit declined. Knight to F3. Very good move. Let's play knight to f6. The whole idea of the QGD is to one, try to get your king castled by 5 move, then focus on your queenside pieces. Very, very solid way to play. After e3, we play the move bishop to e7, and we're just going to get our king out the center of the board. Bishop to d3 was played. This is a sign that we're going to be taking on c4 in order to help our light squared bishop. But for now, let's just get our king castled. He also got his king castled. Now we just need to play pawn to c6. So just remember that little pawn triangle there, and you're not going to be going wrong. Now, after they play knight c3, now is the time when we're like, okay, how do we get this light squared bishop in the game? First thing we want to do is take on c4, forcing the opponent's bishop to move again. Once the bishop takes, we play b5, forcing the bishop to move one more time. The bishop went back. Now we play bishop to b7. And just keep in mind, your bishop's issue is not solved until your bishop is on a long diagonal. Knight e5 is actually a very testing way to challenge our bishop, basically. But for now, let's just finish our development. It's very important that we finish our development. He decided to take on d7. That's moving the knight too much times. Now I'm able to play queen takes. It's easier for me to get my rooks in the game. Very, very solid. And then he plays pawn to e4, which means he doesn't really talk to his pieces. Like, if you don't talk to your pieces in chess, then you're not going to be able to play good chess, because he's trying to develop his bishop, but moving the pawn to e4 left the d4 pawn unprotected. This is called the drawback principle. The drawback mistake is like one of the main ways how persons blunder, apart from the ones like when they put their piece on a square and the opponent take it, or the opponent attacks something and they just did not see it. After that, it's the drawback mistake. So before you make a move, please ensure that you just ask your piece, like, what were you doing here? So that way, I want to know if you're doing something important before I move you away. So he decided to play the move rook to e1, which is a very interesting and good move, because what he's trying to do is, if he plays e5 and attack my knight and I move the knight, bishop takes h7 will win my queen. But he doesn't really have enough time to do that, basically, because now I'm able to play rook to d8. I'm already applying pressure to his bishop, which means if he attacks my knight, I'm just going to take his bishop. And because I'm ahead by a pawn, I want the queens off the board. Like, the moment you find yourself with an extra pawn, you should start thinking of getting the queens off the board. And then he plays bishop to e3, which means either one, he does not know how to count, or two, he's just not looking on the opponent's last move. Because clearly my last move was rook d8, applying pressure to his bishop. I now have two pieces attacking his bishop. He only has his queen guarding the bishop. So I'm just going to take the bishop, and that's a free bishop. I'm now ahead by 4 points. What? 15 moves in the QGD? We still did not solve the issue of this bishop, by the way. You solve the issue of the bishop when you manage to move the pawn to c5 and you don't lose the pawn on b5. So rook to d1 was played. We want to trade, seeing that we're winning, but we don't want to just take. It's usually best to double up on someone's rook. Okay, I forgot to talk to my rook, because my rook was actually guarding my pawn on a7, and now the bishop is able to take on a7. The good thing is I'm ahead by like 4 points, so trading is going to be helping me anyways. But it's very important to have the habit of ensuring that your pieces do. It's like you own a company and you have employees, and you just randomly decide to say, hey, you're moving to that spot, and you didn't even think about what the employee was really doing on the other spot. Or, okay, he plays rook to c1. We want to trade, so let's just pin the knight. But let's just say you're like a general, right? In a war, like a bunch of soldiers, and you're managing some soldiers. And some of the soldiers were over there. This is something that you can learn in The Art of War by Sun Tzu, by the way. Some of the soldiers are over there, and you're just like, hey, I want all five of you guys over there. But then the soldiers over there were doing such an important role in the battlefield. And as soon as you move them, everyone just invades, and then, you basically lost. So he plays a3. We're definitely going to be trading on c3, because we're ahead by a piece. We want to trade as much pieces as possible. If he takes with the rook, I trade with my eyes closed. But he decided to take with the pawn. This is an unprotected pawn, though. So let's take on e4. And now's the time where if he takes on a7, I don't care, because I still have two pieces threatening his c3 pawn. Pawn to f3 attacks my knight. The plan was to take on c3 anyways, so he's basically helping me to take on c3. My bishop is still not working, guys. Like in the other videos, you're gonna see exactly how I move the pawn and then my bishop gets the long diagonal. But my opponent, he basically didn't allow me to use my bishop, to be honest. He finally decided to take the free pawn on a7. And how do we continue here? I want to play c5, but the bishop is gonna take. I want to play rook a8, but then he goes here to guard the pawn. Hmm. Okay, let's play knight to a2 first and attack the rook. And then once the rook moved, I could finally put my rook on the second rank. Remember that rooks belong on the second rank if you're black, and it belongs on the seventh rank if you're white. So he attacks my knight. Now I put my rook on the seventh rank, guarding my knight. It would be in a perfect world if I'm able to have two rooks on the second rank. So for example, well, he attacks this rook, so I have to put it somewhere. So for now, let's just put it on d3, seeing that's the most forward move that I could make on his half of the board, and I'm attacking the unprotected pawn. But I'm actually trying to just double up my rooks on the second rank. So he pulls his bishop back to attack my rook. Let's play rook to c2 here. I'm going to try to get my other rook to either d2 or b2. But once both of my rooks are on the second rank, then that's where the checkmating attacks will start. So he plays pawn to h3, and I have a very nice idea. If I play rook b3, rook b2, that's two moves. Well, I was thinking about c5, but c5 doesn't really help, right? Nah, that doesn't really help. Let's go with rook b2. Rook b3 followed by rook b2. It takes a bit longer, but we don't rush in the endgame anyways. Like once the rook manages to go there, I'm just going to start eating all his pawns, and he could also be getting checkmated. He plays rook to d1, doesn't do anything. Now I'm just going to put my rook on b2, attacking the pawn. Let's go. I just wanted to give you guys anxiety. Rook to b2 obviously blunders a checkmate, and you have to ensure that you look on the opponent's last move. And if you weren't at least puzzled when I was talking about rook to b2, then you need to work on your chess. Let's play pawn to h5, creating loft for my king. And then if he checks, my king gets a running score, and rook to b2 next is still coming. Bishop to f4 doesn't do much. Let's play rook to b2. I'm going to be taking on g2 next move, and this is going to be leading to some crazy checkmates. Plus, my light squared bishop didn't do anything, but it could in fact assist in the checkmate. For example, once I take, move my pawn, grab this pawn, that could be leading to some checkmates. He checked the king, just a check though. Let's play king h7. Definitely going to be taking on g2 next move. He pulls the rook back. Let's grab the pawn on g2. He moves the king. Now we play pawn to c5, and the bishop finally joins the attack. Once I take on f3, it will be helping me to deliver the checkmate. Okay, he pulled his bishop back to d2, which means for one, I could just take on f3, actually. Like that's a bishop, but because I want to deliver a checkmate, I'm actually going to be taking on f3, guarding my rook and attacking his rook. So even if he moves the rook, I'm still going to be taking the bishop. Another example of the threat is better than the execution. And I'm also trying to play rook h2 followed by rook h1. Okay, he plays bishop to c3. I mean, that's a free bishop, but let's check to see if we have any checkmates. Check he goes here. Check he goes back here. No checkmate just yet. So let's grab the bishop. That's also a rook, but we're going to be checking here. But once we play rook h2, rook h1, that's going to be a checkmate and it ends the game. So rook to d3 hits the bishop, hits the knight. We don't care. We play rook to h2, and it really doesn't matter what he plays. Rook h1 next will be a checkmate. He took on f3, but that's just a checkmate. More QGD against 1,000 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,000. He plays d4. We're going to be playing some QGD. c4 was played. Let's play e6. This is us declining the queen's gambit, by the way. And then after knight c3, we play knight to f6. Remember, the goal is to get our king castled in 5 moves. We're playing against William Chess from the UK, by the way. Let's go bishop to e7. We're going to be castling our king next. Usually, it's good for them to take stakes and then play e3. It's very, very easy development for white if they play like this. I've seen a lot of person in this series leave the bishop on c1 and then play pawn to e3. That's not how you play the queen's game. Well, you could play it like that, but that's a harder way to do it. He developed his knight. Let me just castle my king. And remember what we're going to be doing here. Once we get developed in 5 moves, the goal from here is to figure out all the different ways to solve the issue of my light squared bishop. You guys should already watch like 4 or 5 games, so you should have a little idea of how to get the light squared bishop in the game. Okay, taking on f6 is already bad. You don't just, come on, bro. You don't just put your bishop on g5 and then give up your bishop for a knight, William, because you're moving the same piece more than once in the opening and you're giving up a bishop for a knight. He took on d5. Let's just take back. What he's not understanding is he needs to understand that to take is a mistake and you should only trade when it improves your position. And then the other thing that William is doing, which is bad, the guy's opening the center of the board. It's like, I did not do anything, by the way, or I did not pay William any money to be playing like this. Not only did this guy give up his bishop for a knight, he's actively opening the center of the board with his king in the center and miking out the center. Let's just take on e4. Let's just take on e4. Once he takes with the knight and the king is now on the same rank, which means we play the move rook to e8, pinning the knight to the king. And we could be winning a piece if he does not play absolutely careful here. He has to play bishop to d3. Okay, queen to d3 was played. Still not completely lost though, because there is knight to d2. But let's just continue with bishop to f5, pp on the pp. The knight is pinned. We're applying pressure to the knight. Knight to d2 is the move. Knight d2 is definitely the move that does not lose the knight. Like, I'm trying to find a way to win the knight, but I don't think I'm able to win the knight because I'm not able to play pawn to f5. Like knight d2, queen to d5, there's pawn to f3. However, he has 2 pieces guarding d4, and I have 2 pieces attacking d4. So if he moves his knight away from guarding d4, it's going to be a drawback mistake, and I'm already going to be winning a pawn. But I'm not just going to be getting a pawn from this. Like, he's going to be losing. Okay. He plays knight e5. Can I win some material here though? Because if I takes, I don't win anything. If I takes, queen takes, he has pawn takes. So let's just not take then. It's either c5 or knight c6. Knight c6 I'm leaning more towards because it immediately attacks his knight and it helps me to complete my development. So let's play knight c6. If he takes on c6, then I take and his knight is still in trouble and he's going to be losing the d4 pawn. Otherwise, he's probably going to be playing pawn to f3, but then he's still going to be losing the d4 pawn. This is not how you play chess, William. You don't just give up your bishop for knight early and then open the position with your king in the center. Once you develop your bishop, you should have just complete the development of the rest of your pieces. Move the pawn, develop your bishop, castle your king. Okay, knight takes f6 check. I actually forgot that the knight was actually not extremely pinned. I mean, it's still pinned. His queen is under attack. If I take with the pawn, I'm going to lose the bishop. So I'm forced to take with the queen. But this is crazy. Like, all of my pieces are just active. His queen is also under attack, which means he has to move the queen. And then once he moves the queen, I'm either going to be taking on d4, then taking the knight, or just take the knight, take back on d4. And this is going to be leading to a checkmate. Like 12 moves in the game, he's going to be getting checkmated very, very soon. Queen to b4 was played, and that's already bad. First of all, if I take his knight, he's not able to take my knight because rook takes e5 forks his queen and his rook. If I take his knight, though, he's probably just going to play something else. So I'm going to assume. I know if I take the knight, he's probably going to take back, but you always want to assume that your opponent is going to play the best move. So let's play the move knight takes d4, attacking the queen. Now I have 2 pieces attacking the knight. It's over now because once he moves the queen, knight c2 is also a check. Queen takes knight could lead to a checkmate. He plays queen to b2. Now we're going to be checkmating him in the next two moves, three moves tops. Once we start by playing queen takes knight. After queen takes knight, if he plays king to d1, queen to e1 is going to be a checkmate. If he blocks with the bishop, queen takes is going to be a checkmate. So this is going to be leading to a checkmate. I mean, he could block with the queen, but let's not count that. I mean, it's going to be the same thing. He blocks with the bishop, but that's just a checkmate. More QGD against 1100 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. Play d4. We're going to be playing d5 because we're trying to get a QGD. And he is playing the Queen's Gambit. So we're going to be playing pawn to e6, which declines the Queen's Gambit. Knight c3 was played. Our idea from here is we're trying to be able to get our king castled in 5 moves. So let's develop the knight to f6. And we're trying to castle in 5 moves, 6 moves the most. He took on d5. Let's take back on d5 here. So whenever they take on d5, we're not going to be able to castle in 5 moves. Bishop to g5 is the main move by white here. Now I'm going to play the move bishop to e7 just to get out of this spin, and then I'm going to get my king out the center of the board. Knight to f3. My opponent is playing very well. Let's get the king out the center of the board. My king is now castled in 6 moves. The opponent is developing all his pieces very, very well. Pawn e3 followed by bishop d3 and castle is actually the main theoretical moves that white needs to play here. And as I've been saying, once we get this position, the goal is now to get our queenside pieces developed. But because I do not have a pawn on e6, I don't have to worry about my bishop being blocked in. So development for me is pretty easy here. Now, before you guys play moves like bishop to g4, ensure that you're ready to meet any bishop move that you play with queen to b3, because queen to b3 applies pressure to d5 and b7 at the same time. So it's usually best to play pawn to c6. Like you're always going to be playing pawn c6 and have a pawn structure looking like this. Sometimes you're also not going to be developing your bishop on c8 until you develop your knight to d7 and then move your rook and pull the knight back to f8. But let's see how the opponent continues. Bishop d3. Again, the opponent is playing very, very well. Now, here's what I've been talking about. Let's say I play bishop to g4, right? If I play bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen, he plays queen b3, attack b7. And if I take the knight, he takes on b7. And if I protect b7, then he plays knight e5. And that's already a good position for him. So let's just use the time to develop the knight. Yes, we're blocking in the bishop, but the knight is not going to be staying on d7 forever. We're going to be playing moves like rook to e8, putting our rook on the file, pulling the knight back to f8, or we could also play knight back to e8, which is very, very thematic. And it's something that I want to tell you guys about. It's something that I learned recently. But whenever you're playing the Queen's Gambit decline, if you're able to get a knight on the d6 square anytime, then that's like the best square for a knight. So the opponent plays knight e5. He's trying to be aggressive. His king is not yet castled. So it's definitely a bit concerning for him. I'm thinking of playing knight e8 to trade off the bishops. One more thing that you guys need to keep in mind when playing the Queen's Gambit decline is it's usually good to trade off both pair of bishops. So if you're able to trade off the dark squared bishops and the light squared bishops, it's going to be making your life way, way easier. So knight e5, he decided to start his attack pretty quickly. If I takes pawn takes, knight g4, hit the pawn. The bishop may have to take, and then once I take back, he's not able to play pawn to f4 to guard the pawn because he's going to be blundering his e-pawn. So that's a very nice idea. Let's take on e5. All the opponent needed to do, by the way, is just castle his king and then get his rooks in the game and then start a minority attack. But he did not do that. Let's play the move knight to g4 here. My bishop guards my knight, so we're not blundering anything. My knight is attacking e5. My bishop is also attacking his bishop. So I mean, if he pulls his bishop back to f4, that could definitely be something. But taking on e7 here is definitely not the move. He is, in fact, putting himself at risk of losing a pawn if he takes on e7, which is what he does. Because check this out. Let's say we take on e7, right? I'm attacking the pawn on e5. I'm also attacking the pawn on e5 twice. He has no piece guarding the pawn. The only way for him to get a piece guarding the pawn is to play pawn to f4. But there's a drawback if he plays pawn to f4. His e3 pawn is going to be left hanging. And I'm just going to be taking on e3. And I'm going to be attacking his queen. Queen c2, it's not a bad move at all. He's creating a battery pointing towards my h7 pawn, so we have to defend against h7. I mean, if I take the free pawn now, he's going to be capturing on h7. So let's just play pawn to h6, so that way, if he tries to check on h7, I'm just going to be moving the pawn. I'm still going to be taking on e5 with my knight next move and attack his bishop. And if he plays pawn to f4, I'm still going to be taking on e3 and attack his queen. This guy's username is Skiddy Sigma Duck. These usernames are crazy. Which flag is this? Vietnam. He castled the king on the queen side. Let's just grab that free pawn. I'm also attacking his bishop. My knight is very centralized and active here, so I may not immediately take his bishop. If I'm able to get rid of my light squared bishop, though, that would be very good. Or if I'm able to play something like bishop g4 to h5 and then back to g6 after taking his bishop, then that would also be very good for me as well. Okay, I think the opponent is reading my mind. Like, I just said I'd love to get rid of the bishop, and he played bishop to f5. So it's my pleasure. Let's get rid of the bishop. Now, if he plays queen takes, I'm fine. Like, I'm ahead by a pawn. All my pieces are developed. Now I just need to get my rooks in the game. Knight c4 is definitely on the radar. Knight c4, he's also not able to play pawn to b3 due to some checkmating attack. So let's actually start with knight c4, because queen to b4 also threatens a checkmate. Now, I try to say this a lot because a lot of persons don't know what to do in the middle game. And apart from just doing pawn breaks in the middle game, which will also help you to attack the opponent's king, just try to point pieces towards the opponent's king around the squares that are only being guarded by the king. So if you notice this b2 pawn is only being guarded by the opponent's king, that's the square that we're trying to overload here. Pawn to e4, it's a very interesting move. Now, pawn to e4 blocks out his queen. Like, I was actually not planning on playing queen to b4 because it would have been very easy for him to just pull his queen back and defend. But what if I play queen to b4 now? How does he defend the b2 pawn? I mean, yeah, like, how does he defend the b2 pawn? If he moves the pawn forward, he loses the knight. Unless he's trying to play rook to d2 and give me a rook. There's no knight moves. If he plays knight a4, I take the knight. This is just GG's. This is like a little miniature. I was expecting it to be a longer game, even though I'm ahead by a pawn, but the game ends here. I didn't even get a chance to swing my rooks in the game or anything. He has to sacrifice his rook. Oh, he did play rook to d2. Let's just get rid of the rook. And then because he took with the king, his b2 pawn is also not protected. So now I'm able to play the move queen takes b2, checking the king and attacking the opponent's knight. So if he is not trying to lose the knight, he has to play something like king to d3, which is not where you want to have your king. Like, he is going to be getting checkmated here. The first thing I'm going to do is take on e4 with check. He could take with the knight or the queen, but what I'm actually trying to do is swing my rooks in the game with tempo. Okay, he decided to take with the knight. I'm thinking of just the simple rook to d8, checking the king. Like, I'm not really seeing any checkmates here, but the king is just not safe. I mean, there's queen d4, but then the king moves. Still not seeing any checkmates. So let's just use the time to get all our pieces in the game. Rook f to e8 also pins the opponent's knight to the king. And, once we pin the knight, we're planning on applying pressure. So the game is just over now. Andy only has 30 seconds on the clock. So rook king to f3 was played. One more thing I'm noticing is the king and the queen is on the same line. So I was actually thinking about putting a rook here, but the knight covers it. Rook to d3, he's just going to be moving his king. So let's just play an attacking move here. Let's play the move rook to e5, just attacking the queen. The queen is one of the defenders of the knight. So I'm also trying to remove both of these defenders from guarding the knight. And that's when I'm going to check his king, and I should be able to win his knight. He moves the queen, and once we check on d3, he's going to be losing on time. With that being said, more QGD against 1200 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1200, plays d4. Let's play d5. This is going to be QGD. So c4 was played. This is the Queen's Gambit. Let's play e6. This is called the Queen's Gambit declined. Knight c3. Here we play knight to f6. Remember to keep in mind what the goal is in the QGD. It's to get castled in 5 moves. That's the first milestone that we're trying to get out of the way. Bishop to G5, that's one of the top moves. Now we're going to be playing bishop to E7, just breaking the pin. We're still on move 4 though, and the goal is to get castled in 5 moves. If the opponent takes on D5, then we take back, then we castle. If not, we're just going to be getting castled. So knight to f3. Now we simply get our king out the center of the board. So first goal is complete. Our king is castled in 5 moves. Second goal is to figure out how are we going to be getting the queen side pieces developed. And based on how the opponent is playing, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be playing the move pawn to c6. Now, the whole idea of this pawn pyramid is to play knight d7, wait until the bishop comes to d3, then take on c4, followed by playing d5. Queen c2, that's a good move. Basically, what the opponent is trying to do is he's trying to delay the development of the light squared bishop because he knows that once he develops the bishop, I'm just going to take it to gain the tempo. But let's just play knight to d7 for now because what we're trying to do is wait on this bishop to get developed, then we take on c4. So usually the main moves by white in this position is to continue with moves like rook to d1, just developing all the pieces except moving the light squared bishop. And then bishop to d3 was played. Now, I want you guys to be very careful about this battery on h7. The knight is currently guarding h7, and if the bishop takes on f6, or knight is going to take back on f6, so nothing to be worried about now. So this is definitely the time to take on c4, forcing the opponent's bishop to move again. And then once the bishop takes, now we play pawn to b5, because the whole idea is to get our light squared bishop to b7. And if you notice, the bishop went back to d3 immediately. Now we put our bishop on b7. The bishop is not yet a good bishop because the c6 pawn is in the way. But once we get the chance to play pawn to c5, then that's when the bishop becomes a good bishop. Whoa, that's interesting. The opponent decided to castle on the queen side. It's you could say it's also aggressive because the rook is on the same line as our queen. So we have to be very careful about playing moves like pawn c5. For example, I mean, we can't really play pawn c5 right now because anytime we play c5, we lose the b pawn. But even if we could play c5 after he takes, knight takes, there is bishop h7 that we have to keep in mind. Now, because we don't want to lose this h7 pawn, I'm going to start by playing pawn to h6. So now we're just definitely not worried about losing the h6 pawn because we're either forcing the bishop to move so that way we get the bishop here. Well, we're forcing the bishop to move or forcing the bishop to take so that way we get the bishop here. Now we're going to be taking with the knight. The plan is to play c5. It's a more long-term plan. If it reaches a point where we just never ever get to play c5, then it could be a problem. Knight to e5 was played. We still don't want to play c5 just yet, but because of the opposite side castles, I'm definitely planning on starting an attack on the opponent's king. One thing I'd also like to do is to get my queen off the same line as the opponent's rook. So I'm thinking of either playing queen c7. Maybe I could start with rook to b8. Pawn to b4 is usually an idea as well. Queen to a5 is also an idea. I think I'm going to be playing queen to a5. Yeah, let's definitely play queen to a5. Now, here's the idea with queen to a5. If you notice, we are attacking this pawn on a2, which is being guarded by his knight, but it's only being guarded by the knight. So if we're able to play a move like pawn to b4, chasing the opponent's knight away, then we could be winning the pawn on a2. So immediately putting the queen on a5 could be a threat. Another idea that I'm keeping in mind is, remember how we're like, we never want to play c5 and lose the a6 pawn, the b5 pawn? I'm actually thinking about losing the b5 pawn now because let's say I play c5, right? Losing the b5 pawn, and I get to open the c file. It would basically means the C and the B file is open and I would be able to start my attack. Now, if I play B4, I'm assuming the opponent is going to be putting his knight on A4. So I'm not necessarily going to be able to take on A7. Pawn to C5, takes, takes. that's probably the idea. Pawn c5. If he takes with anything else, I should just be able to take and start my attack. The opponent is also threatening his own attack. Notice how he plays pawn to h4? Because he wants to use my hook on g5 against me. I know g4 followed by g5 is coming, and whenever these moves happen, we have to be careful. So I'm going to immediately play pawn to c5. And the only reason why I'm so or I just don't care about losing my b pawn, as we said, is it will open the b file pointing towards the king, and I'm also slowing down his attack. Now, keep in mind, I have zero intentions of taking on g2 because once his rook gets the file, my king could be getting mated. So he took on b5 again. Maybe he's like, okay, what is this guy doing? He just blundered a pawn, but I wanted to give him that pawn, if that makes sense, because now his bishop is under attack. I don't want to immediately take on d4 just yet because rook takes d4. He could be playing moves like rook to a4 in the future, and it could be attacking my queen, gaining some tempo. So I'm going to start by playing the move rook to c8. I'm putting my rook on the same line as his queen, and it's also on the same line as his king. So a lot of tactical ideas could arrive from this. For example, I'm already thinking about taking the pawn, and then it really doesn't matter what he takes with. If he takes with the rook or the pawn, I could sack my rook on c3. Still doesn't matter what it takes with. The knight being the only defender of his bishop, I will be able to take the bishop afterwards. And once I'm able to get two pieces, okay. He just played pawn a3. I think he's making it even better for me because notice my bishop is also x-raying this pawn on a3. So once I take on d4, I'm also thinking about sacrificing my bishop on a3. For example, let's say he plays pawn takes and I sack on a3 and he takes, then rook takes c3 could be winning. Oh, okay. Now the position is even crazier because look on this. What if I sacrifice my rook on c3? No. If the pawn takes, I should be able to play at least bishop takes a3 and then take the bishop. If the queen takes, however, I'm thinking about playing rook to c8, pinning that queen. Okay, but then he has rook to c4. So I guess I'm just gonna be taking on b5, and I could claim that I have the two pieces for the rook. So let's sacrifice our rook on c3. And for the persons who are wondering if rook c3 is really a good move, just always keep in mind that two pieces will always be better than one. The knight and the bishop is better than the rook. So queen takes c3 was played. Before we play rook to c8, which can also be met with bishop c4, let's just take on b5 first. So the position from a material perspective is equal. Like nobody has any extra point. But if you're talking about whose pieces are active and whose pieces has more potential, I'd have to give that to myself, to be honest, because I just have more pieces on the chessboard than him. Now, don't get me wrong. If he's able to really use his rooks the right way, then sometimes the rook could play against the knight and the bishops. But a knight and a bishop, they also just work so well together. His queen and king is still on the same line. I am also attacking this unprotected knight. So let's see what he plays. Okay, queen to c7 is just GG's. He's trying to defend the knight, but you don't defend the knight keeping the queen and the king on the same line, Braden. Because all I need to do is pin your queen now. I just need to hit you with a move like rook to c8. There goes your queen, bro. And this is the reason why it was not safe to castle on the queen side. Usually, persons don't castle on the queen side when they play QGD. He had to sack his queen. Now we take the queen. Now I'm ahead by 4 points, and his knight is still under attack. So now he has to save his knight, which he did not do. He decided to double up the rook. So let's also grab the knights. He also has no entry points coming in my half of the board. As you can see, pawn covers there, bishop covers there, bishop covers there, bishop covers here. Rook to d3. Now we just need to get the rest of our pieces in the game. Now, how am I going to be setting up this checkmate? Let's start by playing bishop to a6. Bishop a6 hits the rook. So the rook has to move. Then I'm going to be getting my knight over there. And then I'm going to be getting my bishop over there. And that's how we're going to be getting a checkmate. So for example, rook c3, no entry points still. Let's play the move knight to d5, attacking the opponent's rook. Rook to c6 attacks my unprotected bishop. So not a bad move. I mean, I'm ahead by 7 points, so I can get away with anything, to be honest. For example, I'm thinking of sacrificing the knight, and after takes, I check, and he will be able to block with his rook. So I will not get much, but it will help me to simplify the game. So let's sacrifice on e6. Remember, if you have a substantial lead in material, don't be afraid of sacrificing in order to simplify the game. So, for example, after takes, he blocks with the rook. I know that my bishop will still be under attack, but I'm also thinking of just leaving the bishop hanging, taking on h4. So here's what I'm thinking. He took with the pawn, we take, looks like a fork, but he is able to block with the rook. My bishop is under attack. I'm thinking of taking here. He takes, then I pull my bishop back to pin his rook. And then after he guards the rook, I just need to move my queen and then take his rook. And then I have one of those positions that I know I'm not going to lose. Or if I don't want to be taking too much risk, I could also just play bishop to d3. But this is not any risk. Let's just take on h4. If you have a huge lead in material, simplify the game by sacrificing. Now I'm still ahead by 7 points, but he took 4 points. So now I'm only ahead by what? 4 points? Let's pull the bishop back. Now I'm actually pinning his rook and I'm applying pressure to the rook. So I basically saw this, he has to guard it. And once I make any move in this position, my bishop will be able to take his rook on the next move. For example, let's play something like queen to c5 check. This is still pinned. He is still forced to move his king. We take the rook, and once he takes back with his rook, it's basically GG's here. So one thing I need to do is get my king. Well, the opponent resigns. More QGD against 1,300 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,300. He plays d4. Let's just play d5. We're going to be playing against, okay, he plays knight c3. Looks like we may be playing against a Joe Bava London. Now, it's kind of like the same thing. Some slight differences. For example, we don't play e6 here. We play knight to f6 because he did not attack us with one of his pawns. But then he plays a3, which is weird. Because why would he play h3? I'm not even threatening to put a bishop here. That's an unnecessary pawn move. Let's just continue with our idea. Let's play e6, bishop e7, and just castle our king. Knight to f3, he's developing his pieces. Let's go bishop e7 and castle. And remember what we said. If you're able to get your king out the center of the board by move 5, then you are doing something correctly. So he puts his bishop on d3, and now is when we're like, okay, what do we do with our queenside pieces? So here's what I'm going to do. The opponent wants to play pawn to e4 in this position. I think he's going to e4 takes. I think I need to play knight to d7. And this is something that you guys want to keep in mind. Okay, he did not play e4. He plays bishop to d2 instead. That was not necessary. It would have been better for him to play e4 and then put his bishop on f4 or g5. I'm going to play the move pawn to b6 with the whole idea of playing bishop to b7. And if he does not play e4 now, which he did, bishop to b7 would have made it very hard for him. So let's just take on e4. And then once the knight takes, I'm not necessarily going to be taking and allowing him to attack my rook. I'm just going to develop my bishop. For example, once he takes here, we just develop the bishop. And again, have a look on my position. These are the major thematic positions that you want to have. The knight decided to take on f6. Let's just take with the knight. All our pieces are good here. I'm thinking about moves like pawn to d5. I could also play queen to d5 and have a very annoying battery pointing towards his king. The opponent decided to play queen to e2. Looks like he's planning on castling on the queen side. Now, this did lose a pawn, so hopefully you're able to find it. It's also very important that you are aware of the risk that comes with winning this pawn. For example, the tactic I'm about to use is called removing the guard, where I want to take on d4, but the queen guards d4. So the idea is to take on f3 first, and then once he takes back, then I take on d4. What do I get? A free pawn. What do I lose? The bishop here, a very strong bishop. What does the opponent gain? He gain a bishop here, especially if he takes with the g pawn. You could also say his rook gets the open file pointing towards my king, and that's what he did. But let's just take the pawn here, because again, a pawn is a pawn at the end of the day, and I'm also going to try to start some attack on his king. Bishop to c3 attacks my queen. I'm thinking of playing queen to d5 here, but after bishop f6, queen to e4, and I may immediately lose the game. Queen f4, I'm thinking of, but there is also bishop to e5. You know, this is what comes with when you lose the bishop here, by the way. So I'm just thinking about where can I put my queen so that way on the next move, he's not able to attack my queen again. That's basically how I'm thinking about the situation. So if queen d7, in some cases, there's bishop b5. So let's just put the queen on h4. It also protects my king. I'm expecting him to play rook to g1 here, because what I would love to do is play knight d5 and just get back the bishop here. Because keep in mind, what he has that I don't have is the bishop here. If I get the bishop here, I'm going to be ahead by a pawn and I'll have the bishop here. So that's going to be very good for me. He decided to castle his king. I think an attack will be coming my way very, very soon. Like, I'm immediately thinking of knight d5, hits the bishop. I need to get my rooks in the game though, but I think I need to neutralize these bishops pointing towards my king. So knight d5 hits the bishop. If he sack, I'm just going to move. So that's fine. So let's play knight d5. Let's hit the bishop. I'm also threatening to double up his pawn, so he may have to pull the bishop back. The good thing about my position is if he moves the bishop, I have the option of playing knight to f4, which forks the queen and the bishop. But then he has queen to, oh my lord, he sacrificed the bishop. That's very aggressive, bro. I calculated it though, so it does not work. Because once I take on g7, rook to g1 check, king to h8, if he plays queen to e4, it's not a checkmate because I'm able to block the check with my bishop. But I'm not gonna lie though, like being able to spot these kind of aggressive sacrifice will be helping your chess in the long run. But you need to be able to calculate to see even further ahead, basically. Because he basically checks me now. If he checks no, I still block with the bishop. Now his queen is under attack. If he checks my king, I just pull the king back to h8. His queen is under attack. I'm not getting checkmated. He has to move the queen. And if I'm able to force the queens off the board in this position, I'm chilling. So now he has to put the queen somewhere where I'm not going to be able to force a queen trade. For example, if he puts the queen here, I take. Maybe he needs to put the queen here. If he puts the queen here, queen to d4 is a very strong threat. Because if pawn c3, I takes, check. It's tricky though. It's very, very tricky. I don't think I'm going to be complicating the position, being ahead by a piece. If I'm ahead by a piece, I just want to trade pieces off the board and win the game that way. But let's see how he responds. He's very aggressive, so I'm expecting some nice sacrifices coming. My boy Kanda GR representing Mozambique. Okay, so bro, you don't sacrifice a piece just so that way you can trade the queens on the next move. That's very, very backwards. I mean, he's not even threatening anything. That's the thing. Like, let's just take the queen. I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. It's the principled thing to do. Trade the queens off the board. If he takes with the pawn, attacks my knight. Knight f4 hits the bishop. If he takes with the bishop, which is pinning my knight to my rook, I simply move the rook on the open file, breaking the pin, and then I'm going to be able to move my knight if he plays pawn c4. So I'm just ahead by a piece in this position. I'm going to be trading everything. Like rook to g8 is also coming. So pawn c3 was played. He's trying to say my bishop is inactive. Let's play rook to g8, getting the rooks off the board. The best thing for him to do is to move away his rook so that way he does not allow the trades, because if he allows the trade, for example, this, maybe he thinks I'm going to take with the rook and then he takes and he wins a pawn. But I know how the drawback principle works, bro. If I take with the rook, I only have one defender versus your two attackers. So I'm actually going to be taking with the king in this position. My knight is still defended twice. And okay, that's just a check. Again, I know how the drawback principle works. If I move my king to f8, I'm going to lose this pawn. Now, I'm thinking about putting my king on h8, but my king is a bit too cut off. So let's just block with the bishop and everything is fine. I'm also thinking of playing pawn to f5 next, which will just attack his bishop and chase his bishop away. So pawn to h4, he's trying to play h5 followed by h6, but that plan is too slow, bro. In fact, I'm going to play the move knight to f4. Offense is the best defense. His attack is too slow. I'm threatening to play the move knight to e2, checking the king and hitting the rook at the same time. This is called a fork. He has to play a move which defends against this fork. And then I'm probably going to play f5 and just chase away his bishop. So he prevented the fork. Let's go f5. His bishop is not necessarily trapped. but there's not a lot of comfortable squares for his bishop. For example, bishop c6, nobody likes that. Let's play rook to d6 here and attack the bishop. And then he pulls the bishop back to a4. And because the rook is on the same line as my king and my bishop is pinned, let's just move the bishop out the way here. We're in the end game, so it's very important that we do not rush the end game. He plays rook bishop to b3. And one thing that I want you guys to keep in mind is in the end game, the goal is to attack weak pawns. I'm thinking about playing rook to d3, but rook to g3 just safely guards the pawn. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play the move bishop to f6. I'm still attacking weak pawns. If he pushes the pawn, I take. If he plays rook to h8, trying to guard the pawn that way, that's too passive. He pushed the pawn. Now we take. Now we have a pass pawn. What do we do when we have pass pawns? We roll them up the board. We push them. Let's guard the knight. If I move the knight, I'm going to be losing the pawn. So let's just guard the knight. Remember, it's very, very important for us to be patient in the end game. My whole game plan from here is to roll my pawn up the board. He checks my king. Let's block with the bishop. There's no way to apply pressure to my pinned bishop because knight takes f5 is definitely there. So my next move is going to be knight f5 anyways, and then I'm just going to roll the pawn up the board. He moves his king back. Maybe he's afraid of rook d2, which doesn't do much. Let's just move the knight. Like my next 1, 2, 3, 4, my next 4 moves is going to be guaranteed pawn moves, unless he blunder or does something weird. King move, pass pawns must be pushed. Pawn moves, pass pawns must be pushed. We're just rolling the pawn up the board. Roll the pawn up the board. That's all I'm doing. Okay, he checks the king. Big deal. Let's just move. Doesn't do much. Once I keep my bishop guarded, I'm not worried about anything. I'm not going to rush rolling the pawn up the board, though. For example, if I push and he goes here, I have no way to guard the pawn. Okay, but now once he goes here, it's just over. Maybe he thinks once I take his bishop, he takes my bishop and he's winning. But what he did not see is once I take the bishop, he takes my bishop. I move the pawn to h2. He has no way to prevent me from queening. So let's just take the free bishop. Because if he takes my bishop, pawn push, rook can't go here. I take the rook. Rook can't go here. I take the rook. So this is just GG's. Okay, let's just queen the pawn. This is just GG's. We're going to be checkmating him on, let's say, the next 4 moves. Take here, rook here. Okay, he's trying to guard the pawn. Let's go here. I'm now threatening checkmate in 2. I'm going to take the pawn, king back. That's going to be a checkmate. So I'm assuming he's going to play pawn to b3. And then I'm going to check here, king moves, and then rook to d3 is going to be a force mate. So in the next 3 moves, the game is over. So he puts the king here. Okay, this is actually checkmate. Okay, not in 2, but check. If king here, then that's mate. If king here, okay, he puts the king here, then that's just a checkmate. More Queen's Gambit decline against 1,400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,400. He plays d4. Let's play d5 here. And we're going to be playing the QGD. This is the Queen's Gambit. This is the Queen's Gambit decline. And you guys have been watching the video for a while now, so you should know what the ideas are. For example, we play knight f6, followed by bishop e7, followed by simply castling our king, castling the king on 5 moves. So knight e3 was played. Let's play bishop e7, followed by castling the king. Okay, now the opponent plays e3. Would have been best to play bishop g5, then e3, but let's just castle the king. The first thing is out the way. We managed to get our king castled in 5 moves. The second thing that we want to do is deal with the development of our queenside pieces. To do this, I'm going to play the move pawn to c6. Again, this pawn triangle right here, you guys should be familiar with it. The opponent decided to castle the king. Now I take on c4. Now, the whole idea is to get them to move the bishop more than once, but it's so that way we're able to play this move, pawn to b5, which is a very interesting idea. Once the bishop move, we're able to play bishop to b7, and then we want to be able to play pawn c5, so that way our bishop gets the long diagonal, and we want to do this, and we also do not want to lose our b5 pawn in the process of doing this. So the opponent decided to play knight e5, which is a very nice move, by the way. Let's just play knight to d7 here, finishing our development. Keep in mind, if we're not able to play pawn c5, then it could mean that bishop to b7 was bad. So we have to be able to play pawn c5. The only thing that is preventing me from playing pawn c5 in this position is my pawn on b5. So let's just play the move pawn to a6. Then I'm going to be playing pawn c5, especially since my opponent is trying to attack me on the king side. It's very important that I try to counterattack in the center of the board. Queen to f3, that's definitely a nice move because the opponent basically sees the idea. He knows that what I'm trying to do is play c5. So the thing is though, he puts his queen on the same line as my bishop, so it could also be very risky. Now I'm thinking about, where do I put my queen? Do I put my queen on c7? Do I put my queen on b6? I'm leaning towards b6 just because it will put his d4 pawn under attack. In fact, let's play the move queen to b6. Now, one thing I need to be aware of is my knight on d7 is only being guarded by this knight on f6. And the knight on f6 is also guarding my h7 pawn. So I don't want to be in a situation where my knight on f6 is overworked. For example, if he plays queen to h3, he's basically threatening to first take on d7, and then once I take back on d7, then he checkmates on h7. So we have to be able to see these ideas. He decided to play pawn to e4 though, which definitely has a drawback. I mean, the pawn on e4 was guarding the pawn on d4. It's no longer guarding the pawn, so that's definitely a free pawn. Now, before I take the pawn, though, I am thinking about taking on e5, which is just a very nice in-between move because his d pawn is still going to be pinned. If he takes with the f pawn, now I take on d4 with check. And then once he moves the king, I take on e5, and I'm going to be ahead by 2 pawns. So that's very nice. So let's take on e5, which is attacking the opponent's queen. So now he's forced to take with the f pawn. Again, the pawn on d4 is pinned. He took with the f pawn. Now we take on d4. He has to react to the check, and my next move is going to be to take on e5. Now there is bishop to e3, and if bishop to e3, you could say I'm able to take his bishop, but then he takes my knight, and then I take back his pawn, and then we're basically trading. I do not hate that idea. The thing is, though, after takes, he is able to play rook to d1, and then he's forcing my queen to move. And then if I take here, he has bishop to f5. But then I'm able to put my queen on better squares. I like the idea of this, but after takes, rook d1, he will be forcing my queen to move too many times. So let's just take on e5. We're ahead by 2 pawns, by the way, and we're 15 moves into the QGD. So that's very nice. And then the opponent decided to play pawn to a3. Not sure why. Maybe he's trying to prevent something from going to b4. A pawn. Pawn c5 is definitely my idea. I like the idea of playing bishop c5. You know, I'm winning. I have more material than him. Who wouldn't want to trade pieces off the board? I also really like the idea of playing bishop to d6 because it threatens the checkmate. If he plays bishop d4, I just trade. If he plays g6, then I play bishop to c5 because it opens the diagonal. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm thinking of. But first, I think I'm definitely going to be playing the move rook to d8 to attack his unprotected bishop. I'm also putting my rook on the open file. And then once he deals with the fact that, okay, the bishop is under attack, then I will try my idea. So he decided to play bishop to f4, which is a blunder, and there is a drawback behind this move. Now, it's very easy for us to spot the opponent's blunder because you're already following the game. So you just need to see what changes in the position. The bishop is on e3, covering the d4 square. Moving the bishop to f4 no longer covers the d4 square. Now I'm able to play the move queen to d4 check, which checks the king and attack the bishop at the same time. So he moves the bishop. Let's just take on d3. And we're now ahead by 5 points, which is crazy. This is just completely winning. So the rook goes to d8 to attack my queen. We're trying to trade some pieces off the board. My queen is under attack. Let's just move the queen to a safe square. The funny thing is, I am yet to play c5 to get my bishop on this diagonal. I mean, he's just not allowing me to do it. But then the opponent decides to resign. More QGD against 1,500 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,500, plays d4, Now we play d5, and we are expecting queen's gambit. We're going to be playing pawn to e6. This is the queen's gambit declined, and then he plays e3, which blocks out the bishop. You don't necessarily have to play the queen's gambit like this, by the way, but let's see if we could get our king castled in 5 moves. So the knight goes to f6, he plays knight c3, the bishop goes to e7, and then we castle the king on the next move. So he plays knight to f3. Now we simply castle our king in 5 moves. Our king is out the center of the board. And now what we want to do is develop our queenside pieces. There's a lot of ways to develop our queenside pieces, and it all depending on how white plays. For example, if takes, then my bishop is able to be active on this diagonal. Otherwise, I'm going to be playing c6 or maybe even b6, followed by bishop to b7. So h4 was played. H4 is a very nice idea. I think he wants. Actually, I don't think h4 is necessary just yet. I lost a game the other day with someone playing h4, so I have to be very careful whenever I see some h4 move. But let's continue with our development. Let's play knight to d7. The knight usually always goes to d7, and now we're going to be thinking about our light squared bishop. Bishop to d3 was played. This is what we were waiting on. Whenever the bishop goes to d3, now we could think about taking on c4, forcing the bishop to move again. But what I like to do is whenever we take on c4, I like to be able to play b5 immediately. So I'm actually going to play pawn c6 so that way once I takes, I'm able to immediately play b5. If he takes, then I'm just going to be taking with the e pawn and I'm fine. So knight to g5 was played. He's just trying to play very, very aggressive. For example, pawn to g4 is coming and things could get a bit tricky for me. But for now, there's no real attack there. So let's just continue with our plan. Let's take on c4. The whole idea is to open this diagonal for my light squared bishop. He took on c4. And okay, I was thinking of playing b5, but maybe bishop takes e6. Maybe bishop takes e6 is possible. b5, bishop e6, takes knight e6. I move the queen, he takes. So before I do that, I'm going to play knight to b6 and attack the bishop. I'm going to try to put my knight on the d5 square and then try to put my bishop on b7. So this is actually very, very similar to the Scandinavian defense, by the way. The only difference between this and the Scandinavian is my bishop would have already been on f5. So I need to ensure that I solve this issue with my bishop. So let's go knight to d5. And remember, if they take here, we're going to be taking with the e pawn, which is what he did. So he took with the knight, we take with the e pawn. Now my bishop is fine. So we solve the issue of our light squared bishop. He plays h5. This guy, Jovan Sigma, he's playing very, very aggressive, but his king's in the center of the board. That's not how it works, bro. Because now I'm actually just going to play pawn to h6. Now your pawn storm is not going anywhere. The king is in the center of the board. You're now just forced to pull your knight back to f3. And then I'm just going to finish my development with a regular solid position. So he pulls the knight back to f3. Now, once I play bishop to g4, not only did I solve the issue of my bishop, complete my development, my rooks are not connected just yet, but this is just an overexerted pawn. Like, how are you going to not lose your pawn on h5 on the next move? Also, how is he going to castle his king? If he castle on the king side, it's not safe. Castling on the queen side is also not safe. Let's just grab the free pawn. Maybe he could say that, no, I'm allowing his rook to get the open file, but a pawn is a pawn at the end of the day. Queen to e2 was played. He's looking to castle on the queen side, and that is a cue that I'm going to be attacking his queen side. Now, pawn to c5 is also an idea because if he's planning on castling on the queen side, I need to open the c file. So pawn c5, if he takes, I take, I get the isolated pawn, but I have so many activity for the isolated pawn. So let's play pawn to c5. And I say this a lot in my videos, but I like to be repetitive so that way I drill it in you guys' head. Whenever it comes to planning or starting an attack or finding active squares for your pieces, you have to think about pawn breaks. So he pulls the bishop back to c2, putting the bishop on this diagonal. Now I'm able to take on d4. He's not able to take with the knight because of the pin. He took with the pawn. Now his queen and his king is on the same line, so I'm thinking of rook to e8. But because his bishop is unprotected, okay, I was actually planning on playing rook c8, but Bishop f5 just attacks my queen. So let's just continue with rook to e8. Let's just put our rook on the same line as the opponent's queen and king, which means my next move is going to be a discovered attack. Yeah, I think white is just losing here. This is called a premature attack, by the way, guys. Like, you don't just immediately start your attack with a king in the center of the board like that. So he plays queen to d3. You know, there's a little trick in this position. I want you guys to notice there's a battery here. H7 is not mate because my knight is guarding, but my knight is also guarding h5, which means my knight is overworked. So if he's threatening to take my bishop, and then once my knight takes queen h7 is a checkmate. Also, remember that the threat is better than the execution. So I'm also not in any rush to do the discovered attack. So let's just pull the bishop back to g6, preventing any little threats or tricks that he has. And I'm also just trying to trade the bishops off the board, you know, maybe play rook to c8 and attack the queen. He has to play queen to b3 here. He cannot put his queen on a dark square. Or e2, that's just a bishop. Jovan, Sigma. That's just a bishop. Okay, what if I go here? He has to play knight blocks. Then I take the bishop. But why not just take the bishop in one move, though? I take the bishop, he takes, and then I just take. Hmm. So if I take, there is queen takes. Let's just take the bishop. It's a free bishop. I'm now just completely winning. The queen is on the same rank as my bishop, so he could take on h6, but there's nothing there. Also, if he takes on h6, bishop to b4 is a check. Yeah, this is over. It's completely over now. This is called a discovered attack. Jovan, you're representing Canada, bro. The rook is on the same line as the queen. Now I'm going to play the move bishop to b4. Check. That's a discovered attack. My bishop attacks your king. My rook attacks your queen. You have to either block the check or move the king, or I'm just going to take the queen on the next move. It's just over. It's actually just GG's from here. He blocks with the bishop. Okay, do I take the queen now? Or do I play bishop to d3? Bishop d3 takes, knight block takes, or takes, knight takes. Let's take first with check. He's not allowed to take with the queen due to the pin. If he takes with the king, then I take the queen. And if he takes with the knight, I play, yeah, he did took with the knight. So now I'm going to play bishop to d3. Remember, whenever you see a good move, look for a better one. And the threat is also better than the execution. I want it to be in such a way where I keep his king in the center of the board. So now his queen has to take my rook. And then once I take with check, if he puts the king here, this will lead to a checkmate. And if he blocks the knight, it will also lead to a checkmate. So this position by itself is just a forced checkmate in a few moves. So he took, let's take. If the king goes here, which he did, this is now just checkmate. I check on e2, the king has to go to c1, then I check on c8, the king has nowhere to go, he has to block with the knight, and then queen c2 is going to be a checkmate. So let's check on e2, the king has to go to c1, and then rook to c8 check. There's nowhere for the king, so the knight has to block. Queen c2 is a checkmate, but that's also a checkmate. More Queen's Gambit decline against 1,600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is in the 1,600 region. D4 was played. We're going to be playing some QGD. C4, this is called the Queen's Gambit. Let's play pawn to E6, declining the gambit. E3 was played, so that way if I take, the bishop take, but we know the drill here. Let's just play knight to F6. The goal is to get our king castled in 5 moves. Knight C3, now we play bishop E7. We're going to be castling the king next move. He plays knight F3. Now we simply castle the king. Bishop to d2, he's developing his pieces and he's playing very quickly as well, but usually this bishop is best if it's out here. So if you want to learn how to play the Queen's Gambit, I have a video on that, by the way, but the bishop belongs on g5 or f4. Now I'm going to play the move pawn to c6, and the idea that I'm going to be using is if he takes on d5, I take with the e pawn, my bishop is fine. Otherwise, my plan is actually to get rid of all these 3 pawns so that way my bishop gets this long diagonal, and I'm going to show you guys exactly how I'm going to do that. So he plays queen to c2. Now the mistake that I don't want you guys to make is I don't want you guys to take on c4 until they move the bishop, unless you complete the development of other pieces. So for example here, instead of taking on c4 then playing b5, just play knight to d7 on the first move, and then if he plays bishop d3, That's when we take on c4. H3 was played. Very nice. I mean, you could call it a waiting move. Because again, I don't necessarily want to take and allow this. And I think he wants to play e4. I think he needs to play e4. E4 takes, knight takes, queen takes. I'm going to be able to play knight f6, hit the queen, or try to play for e5 or c5. So let's play the move rook to e8 in this position. And then he plays pawn g4. Oh, there is actually pawn to g4. That's a very aggressive move. Okay, now we have to switch up things. He plays g4, he wants to play g5, he wants to attack my king. And if he plays g5, I don't want to put my knight on the edge of the board. I want to have a safe score for my knight. So now I'm going to be taking on c4. This guy played the opening very, very smart, though. I'm not going to lie. So that way, if he plays g5, my knight will be able to get the d5 square. Now, from this position, I'm going to play the move bishop to d6. I'm trying to be able to play moves like e5. He plays g5. I was expecting that. Let's just play knight d5. Oh, but now he has knight to e4 because my knight no longer guards the e4 square. If knight e4, though, then I may pull the bishop back to f8. f8 was where I was planning on putting the bishop, but I just thought this was a longer diagonal. But let's see what he plays. So he plays h4. He's basically going for the attack. I've lost a game very similarly to this, so I have to be very careful. So I want to play e5. If I play e5, my knight is left unprotected. So I'm thinking of taking on c3, then playing e5. I'm also thinking of playing knight b6, but then he's definitely going to be playing bishop d3. One thing I'm noticing though is my king is out the center and his king is in the center. So my goal here is to open the center. So let's take on c3 so that way I'm able to play e5. I just didn't want to play e5 from before because my knight on d5 would be less defended basically. Now we play e5. And keep in mind, if he takes on e5, I think that's definitely bad because once my knight takes, it really solves the issue of my bishop. And if he plays g5, his knight is the only defender of his pawn, which means a move like pawn e4 may win some material. He has to continue with his aggression. That's the thing. Because castling on either the king side or the queen side is not really safe for him here. Oh, queen to f5. That's a nice move. Because once I play e5, it allows the bishop to get access to this diagonal, and the pawn no longer guards the f5 square. Now, there is knight to f6 because my bishop attacks the queen. I think the move is knight f6. But I'm leaning more towards queen e7. Queen e7, if pawn g6, I takes, queen takes, and I should be safe after something like knight b6. That's a nice move though. Knight f6, however, the queen has to just go back. And then once the queen go back, then my knight is able to go to d5. Yeah, I like that. Well, wait. If I go here, he takes with check, takes. Oh, the queen still has to move. Let's go knight to f6. This is called a discovered attack, by the way. So again, remember, offense is still the best defense. I move my knight out the way, guarding my f7 pawn, but I did it as an attacking move. His queen now just has to go back, but my knight is going to be under attack. So I'm going to probably put my knight on d5. I could also play knight g4 actually. Yeah, like why not just knight g4? Because like I was thinking about playing knight b5, but I didn't want to allow takes, and then I lose the bishop here. I think they're both good moves though, but let's see. So he did went back with the queen. Knight d5, there's also e4. So it has to be knight to g4. And it's oh wait, I think I need to do something about this bishop though. The bishop on c4 is very strong. For example, there is the possibility of playing pawn to h5 now. Okay, pawn g6 is also an idea. Because after g6, I'm not able to take due to the spin. And if I take, there's queen takes, attacking f7. I was about to say that's not a huge threat, but that looks like a threat. There's also just bishop e6. Nah, there's no bishop e6. I think I have to take. So let's take on g6 first. And then after queen takes g6, I want you guys to notice how my f pawn is pinned. I'm not able to take the queen. I need to protect the f7 square. So queen to f6 is the move. Queen to f6, he trades the queen. I take back, takes. It's just some trades, and we go into an endgame. Yeah, let's go with that idea. Let's go queen f6. Everything is still guarded in this position. If he takes, I play knight takes. The only thing is, if takes, knight takes, 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 knight takes, rook takes, then I'm sorry, that was too fast. I'm so sorry. If queen takes queen, knight takes queen, his pawn is gonna take. And once my bishop takes, his knight is gonna take. And then once my rook takes, he has the bishop pair, which is an advantage. The thing is, though, his dark squared bishop is blocked in behind his pawns. So if he's able to find a way to open the position, then his bishop here is going to be strong. Otherwise, I'm going to use my knights and I'm going to put them in the center of the board, and then my knights are going to be very strong. So he did trade. Let's play knight takes. Knight to g5 is also a very attacking and aggressive move. Yo, this guy's playing very aggressive. So the first move that pops out to me is bishop e6. Knight e6, pawn e6 takes, takes, but then I have a very weak pawn. The second move that pops out is just to play rook to e7. And if I play rook to e7, if he decides to take, then my rook takes back. And if his bishop takes, my king takes back. And the two minor pieces will beat the rook. So let's go with rook to e7 here. This guy's playing some chess, though. I'm not going to lie. And then he plays h4. No, he's trying to attack with the queens off the board. Like, who teaches these guys to play chess? Like, the Indians, man, they just have their own way of thinking about chess. Like, I have a student who says, if he's playing against anyone, the moment he sees the Indian flag, he just aborts the game. Okay, what will I do? I need to finish my development. So take on d4. The c pawn takes on d4. Bishop to f5. Oh, bishop f5 loses to knight f7. Hmm. Okay, if he push, I takes, and then after rook takes, I have king to g7, and the rook is under attack. So that is pretty safe. So I guess I just need to develop my bishop because I'm not worried about h6. Yeah, let's just develop the bishop. But this guy's playing very strong, man. These Indians, man, they have their own way of thinking about chess. And I only have 2.5 minutes on the clock. Usually, when I'm in a losing position, I have more time. So that way I can start flagging. But now I don't even have more time. Well, this is not a losing position, by the way. I don't think I'm losing. I think I think I just have to be careful. So let's clarify that. Because I'm not down by any material and the queens are off the board. So there's no real attack. And if he plays h6, I take on h6, play king g7, and I attack the rook. So I'm not losing. Unless he plays a move that is very surprising to me, which I'm not seeing. But let's see. He's an Indian, so he has something up his sleeve. And now he plays pawn to f3. I think he wants to play pawn to e4 to chase away my bishop. He's also being very patient. I'm not gonna lie. This guy's playing very patient chess. What I'm okay. I was just about to play takes, but now I think e4. No, if e4 my bishop is bad, he has f4. So let's just take on d4 here. He has to take with his d pawn. Now he's starting to play e4. Bishop to f5 attacks the knight. Knight takes f7. Okay, here's the trick. Bishop to f5 attacks the knight, right? Because the e pawn is pinned. If he plays knight takes f7, if I take, he's going to be able to take my bishop. But after bishop f5 attacks the knight, if he takes on f7, I'm going to check first, then take back. I have to play fast, though. I have 1.5 minutes on the clock, so I don't want to risk losing this game. Pawn to e4, I may take either the bishop or the knight. Okay, he moves the king and blunder the knight. Oh no, he blundered the knight. Maybe he's trying to win me on time or something. Oh, he must be so mad at himself. 'Cause he wanted to do the same. He wanted to set up knight f7. Okay, he's playing. We have to play. Let's pull the bishop back. He's attacking the bishop. If he pushes this pawn, he loses the bishop. Rook to e8 is the next move. So that way I have 3 attackers on the e3 pawn. Right now, I have 2 attackers and he has 2 defenders. So he pulls the bishop back. Not sure why. Let's play rook to e8. Now I have 3 attackers. He has 2 defenders. He had to add an additional defender. But now I play the move knight to d5, adding an additional attacker. And the e-pawn is actually pinned. If he moves the e-pawn, I was going to take his bishop. Let's just take back. He gave up the bishop for a knight. I'm now just ahead by a piece. So should be smooth sailing from here. Maybe I could just transfer both of my rooks to the c file. This rook is not able to move because he's going to lose this pawn. Okay, he puts this rook on the file. Okay, let's just play rook to c8 with the idea of playing rook to c2. Now we're just trying to convert this into a win. Rook c1, he's trying to trade. I mean, I could take, well, let's just double up on the rook. You know, we spoke about this a lot because if I take, his rook gets the file. Now that I double up on the rook, if he takes, I take back and my rook stays remaining on the file. Otherwise, I take his rook. I mean, if he takes with the bishop, I still have the file. And if he takes with the other rook, I'm trading pieces off the board, which is good for me. So he did not trade the rooks. Let's put our rooks on the second rank, attacking weak pawns in the end game. The goal is to get both of my rooks on the second rank. So pawn a3, let's go rook a2, attack the pawn again, but I'm actually trying to get the other rook on the second rank. He moves the king. Let's double up on the bishop, forcing the bishop to go somewhere. Where will he put the bishop? On b5, but that's a drawback. This pawn is left unprotected and I'm attacking his rook. And he has to be careful where he puts that rook. I'm setting up some checkmate here. If he moves the rook, it's mating too. But this guy played very well. I'm not going to lie. This was a very nice game. Okay. I think we have checkmate in two moves here. Yeah, we definitely have a checkmate in two moves. I'm going to play the move rook to g2 check because the rook no longer guards g2. And then the king has to go to h4 on the legal move. And then bishop to g5 is going to be a checkmate. So let's go rook to g4 check. He has to move to h4. And that's just a checkmate. More QGD against 1,700 players. Stick around. The opponent is now 1,700. D4 was played. Let's play D5. And the opponent is playing the Queen's Gambit. Again, we're not going to be accepting the Gambit. We're going to be declining the Gambit with pawn to E6. Now, there's a lot of different ways to play here. He plays E3, which is not really necessary. I mean, it blocks out the dark squared bishop, but it's a fine move. Let's try to get castled by move 5. So let's play knight to F6. Bishop to e7. He develops his knight. Let's go bishop to e7. And the goal is just to get our king out the center of the board. He develops his bishop. Now our king is castled. We know that we're on the right path if our king is castled on the fifth move. From here, how do we solve the issue of our queenside pieces? I'm going to start by playing the move pawn c6. Again, it looks weird, it looks ugly, but the whole idea is to get rid of these pawns eventually. And my bishop is going to be very, very strong on this diagonal. So he plays knight to c3. Here's the idea that you guys need to know. Keep in mind, listen up. We take on c4. We're basically forcing the bishop to be moving the same piece more than once in the opening. So the bishop moved to d3, then to c4. Now we play pawn to b5, forcing the bishop to move again. And that's when we play the move bishop to d7. And keep in mind, the game is not over. We did not successfully put our bishop on a good diagonal until we're able to play pawn to c5. So that's a good move. He's preventing me from playing c5. And if I play c5, I'm losing this pawn. So let's just play the move knight to d7 first, guarding the knight. From here, I'm thinking of taking the knight and then playing knight f6. He plays queen c7. Again, he's really trying to ensure that I don't play c5. And if you guys are watching how white is playing this, this is actually how I want you guys to play with the white pieces. But I'm going to play the move queen to b6 here. The purpose of queen to b6 is, one, it guards my bishop in case a bishop is here and I need to play c5. Two, it also guards my pawn in case I need to play c5 and I don't want to lose this pawn. And three, it allows me to get one rook on d8, one rook on c8, and then both of my rooks are going to be active. Knight e5 is not a bad move. He's actually playing pretty aggressively in this position. I think he's also threatening to win some material if I'm not careful. But we're actually going to be going, I think it's going to be easier for me to play c5 actually, because once I take on e5 here, he has to take with the e pawn, which means there's no pawn on d4, so c5 is going to be easier to play. So let's take, I mean, I'm forced to take, by the way. The only issue with my position is I'm still not able to play c5 because I'm going to be losing my h pawn. So first I need to not lose the h pawn, then I try to play c5. So how do we not lose the h pawn? Is the move g6 or h6? Let's just go with h6 here. I mean, if he checks, we just moves the king. Rook to d8, rook to c8, pawn c5. That's the plan. He plays pawn to b3. Looks like he wants to fianchetto his bishop and eventually put his bishop here. But I'm actually fine here. This is a bad bishop. This is a good bishop. Pawn to c5 here is good. I'm exchanging my bad bishop for his good bishop. He took, let's just take back. And just like that, we have no bad pieces. In fact, if you look on the position a bit close, like try to look on the position deeply. His bishop is actually blocked in by his own pawn. My bishop is, you could say it's blocked in by its own pawn, but it's more mobile. And I have 3 versus 2 pawn majority on the queen side. So my plan is also to advance my pawns and eventually create a pass pawn. So, okay, how do I do this? Let's play the move rook to c8. Let's put the rook on the same line as the queen. You guys know how I feel about this. Even though the pawn is on c5, I want to play pawn to c4 anyways, so that way I could either create a pass pawn on c4 or either take with the rook, double up on the c file, and then my a and b pawn could be very strong. Pawn to f4 is definitely how White needs to play this position. Because once he plays pawn to f5, I have to take. His queen is going to take. He's going to have this massive attack on my king, but he's going to have weak pawns on e3 and e5. And we're going to be trying to play the position very positional and strategic. So let's play the move pawn to c4 in this position. We have to be very active, by the way. Whenever it looks as if someone is attacking your king, you have to be very aggressive. You have to ensure that you know how to counter attack. So he took, I'm actually thinking of taking with the pawn, but bishop c3 is very strong. So let's just take with the rook in this position, hitting the queen, controlling the e4 square. He still wants to play this move, pawn to f5. If f5, I'm just going to take. So I'm thinking of just playing queen to e4, which is very strong. Queen to e4 threatens rook to c2. So let's play queen c4. I'm currently threatening to win a bishop because the queen and the bishop is on the same line, which is why he played the move bishop to d4. He's also centralizing his bishop. Now if I play the move rook to c2, he's able to play something like queen to f3 and he's fine. So my pawn is under attack here. I'm thinking either bishop to c5, just trade the bishops off the board, or pawn to a5. I'm leaning more towards pawn to a5 because it's assisting me in advancing my pawn majority. And then after rook to b1, rook to c2 looked like it was a fart. But if I play rook c2, queen f3 takes, once I take here, he's going to take on b4. And we're not trying to trade the pawns in the endgame. We're trying to win the pawn. So let's play pawn to b4, further advancing our pawn majority. Again, whenever you have more pawns, 2 versus less pawns, 1, move the pawns up the board, and that's how you're going to be able to create a pass pawn. The opponent now decides to play rook to c1. If I take, his rook takes, and I'm not necessarily trading my c rook for his c rook. I would be trading my c rook for his f rook. And my c rook is better than his f rook. So let's just play rook to c8 here. What I'm doing is I'm doubling up on the rook. That's something that you guys want to do as well. Whenever someone offers a rook trade, instead of taking the rook so that way they take and they get the file, double up on the rook. Because I'm basically trying to take over the file for myself. If he takes the rook, I take back the rook, I get the file, I'm threatening rook c2. Otherwise, that's just a rook. So he took on c4. Let's just take back. Rook to c2 is the threat, which would be completely winning because I would be hitting the queen, threatening mate. He has to trade the queens. I win the pawn. If I'm able to win this pawn, it's over because connected pass pawns in the endgame is a winning plan. If you have 2 pass pawns beside each other like this, it's winning. Just push them up the board, you're going to win. So the question is, how does he prevent rook to c2 here? Okay, so he decided to play queen to f3. He's just trying to get the queens off the board. Let's say I takes, right? If I takes, rook c2, he goes back with the rook. I takes, king takes, pawn push. And it's not going to be the easiest game to win. I'm not going to lie. Takes, rook takes. I may need to either get my king way more active, get rid of this bishop. Oh, okay, I just solved it. Takes, rook takes, bishop c5, takes. This is weak. Maybe he goes rook c2. And then I use the time to slowly get my king in the game and win. Okay, that's what I'm going to work with. I think that's the only logical way to win. I mean, I could also play queen c2. Oh, queen c2 is also strong. Queen c2, oh, but then he checks. King up, he takes. and guard the pawn, and he's not getting mate. So let's take rook takes, bishop to c5, getting rid of the bishop because the bishop is doing a very good role preventing my pawn from queening. So after takes, it's going to be a bit easier to advance my pawn majority. After takes, I think he has to play rook to f2. Wait, if takes, rook f2, it's over. Takes, rook f2. I think there's a win in this position if I'm not wrong. Okay, I'm about to win the game. Hopefully, you were able to find it, but this is called the rule of the square. So, rook to c1 check basically forces the rooks off the board, takes. And this is why, whenever you have a pawn majority, you want to push your pawns up the board. Because after push, rook blocks takes, the king is going to be here. Once I push this pawn, this becomes the square. The king is not able to step in the square. And then once I push the pawn, it's going to become a queen. So, rook to c1 is actually GG's. He has to block with the rook. We take the rook. The king has to take, and then pawn to a4 just wins the game. Again, this is now the square. The opponent's king is not in the square. If I push takes, his king is going to step in the square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push takes, and then I'm going to play a3, and then this becomes the square. So let's play pawn to b3. He takes, again, if I take on b3, this is the square. His king steps in the square, I lose the game. Pawn to a3 is what I need to play, and the opponent resigns. More Queen's Gambit against 1800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1800, plays d4. Let's do some QGD stuff. We have someone from the US representing. And then he plays c4. Again, this is the Queen's Gambit. We play e6, declining the Gambit. We're not going to get greedy and take a pawn there. And then the goal from here is to get our king castled in 5 moves. Once we deal with the king side pieces, then it's going to be time to deal with the queen side pieces. So knight f3, he's developing very well. Let's play knight to f6, bishop e7, and castle. Bishop to g5. Guys playing very well. Let's go bishop e7. A lot of person usually play e3 and block out their bishop on c1, but this guy's not doing it. On e3, now we simply castle the king. So we successfully managed to castle our king in only 5 moves. From here, we're trying to get the queen side pieces developed. Bishop to d3 was played. We know what to do when the bishop comes here. We want to take on c4 followed by b5. So let's play the move pawn to c6. Because the whole game plan that we have here is we need to ensure that we improve our light squared bishop because it's currently not doing anything. So here's how we're going to be doing it. We're going to be taking on c4, forcing the bishop to move more than once. Once the bishop takes, we play b5, forcing the bishop to move again. Okay, now once the bishop goes back to d3, now we play bishop to b7. But remember, a bishop on b7 is still a bad bishop. If you don't get rid of your pawn on c6, your bishop remains a bad bishop. And keep in mind, pawn to c5 is going to be a hard move to play, seeing that the b5 pawn is going to be left unprotected. So one idea is actually to play b4, and then once the knight move, we play c5. But I do not think this is the position. b5, knight e4, c5, and then he has enough pieces covering the square. I'm thinking of playing queen b6. I'm thinking of playing knight to d7 as well. Let's just go with knight to d7. Let's just finish our development. All our minor pieces are out, but the light squared bishop is still bad. Remember, I want to play c5. Because I want to play c5, I'm going to play the move queen to b6, protecting the b5 pawn, so that way once I hit him with c5, my b pawn is guarded and my dark squared bishop is good. So he plays queen to c2. The thing is, if I play c5 takes, knight takes, he's going to take on f6. And then once my bishop takes, he's going to take on h7. And if I play h6 takes, then it makes c5 a harder move to play. So how am I going to navigate this? I think I have to play c5. So play c5 regardless. If he takes on c5, I take with the bishop. So that way, if he takes on f6 and my knight takes, my h7 pawn is guarded. I have to play c5. Remember, if you're safely allowed to play c5, you have successfully equalized the position, playing with the black pieces. Not to mention that pawn to c4 could trap the bishop. So I'm expecting him to take here. Any move that is not take is weird, unless he takes on f6 first. If he takes on f6 first, my knight takes on f6, he takes on c5, my bishop takes on c5, and it basically transposed into the same position. Now he plays knight to e5. Knight e5 is a very good move. Wait, knight e5 is a very good move. I keep on forgetting about this knight e5 plan, man. So ensure that you guys look out for this knight e5 move whenever you're playing, because the thing is, my bishop on e7 is actually pinned. So if he takes on d7, I cannot take back with the knight. If I take on e5 and he takes on e5, then I'm going to be forced to play something like knight d5, and then he's going to take on h7. So I think I played c5 a bit too early though. Like, here's what I'm going to do. He's threatening to take my knight, and then once I take, he wins my bishop. So I have to do something about that. If I takes, he moves my knight, and I lose the pawn. So I think I have to play rook to d8 to guard the knight. And then after knight takes, rook takes, he's gonna just do a removing the guard tactic, basically, and win my h7 pawn. So I'm basically about to play the game down by a pawn. So we definitely I think I played c5 just a bit too early. So that's something that you guys need to watch out for. Ensure that when you play a move like e5, like the opponents, there's not like any removing the guard tactic, especially when the queen and the bishop is lining up towards h7, because this could be a way how things go wrong. But let's see how he continues. I'm expecting him to take on d7. So he did take on d7. Now, if I take with the knight, I lose my bishop. So I have to play rook takes d7. And then once he takes with the bishop, it's weird because even if I take with my f bishop, it leaves the c5 pawn hanging. So I have to take with the g pawn. The good thing is, I have the bishop here and I have a lot of pieces pointing towards this king. So I'm going to try to use that as compensation. Let's play king to g7 in this position. I want to play moves like rook to h8, putting my rook on the same line. Well, not necessarily on the same line, but basically lining up my rook towards this king. Bishop to e4 is the strong move that I'm expecting here because this is a very good bishop, and he did play bishop e4. He's just trying to get rid of the strong pieces on the board. I'm thinking about taking here, but once he takes with the knight, it doesn't necessarily help me a lot. So before I do much, let's play the move rook to c8, putting my rook on the same line as the queen. If he takes on b7, I could consider. No, that's bad. If he takes on b7 and I take, I lose the rook. So if he takes on b7, then I have to take back with the queen. And then I'm going to have to play some dynamic chess. We're down by a pawn, but it's just a pawn. We could say we have some attack with our pieces pointing towards this king. I need to get my bishop pointing towards his h2 pawn, and I need to get my rook on h8 attacking his h2 pawn. But let's see how he's going to play this position, because it's not the end of the world for me. The good thing is he's really using up his time. So he took on c5. I'm thinking about taking with the bishop, but taking with the rook is more forcing. And especially since I'm down by a pawn, I'm trying to start an attack here. I'm looking for all the attacking and the aggressive moves that I could play. For example, putting my rook on his second rank is an idea, but there is knight d4. There is rook to g5 to attack this pawn. There's knight g3. But I must attack though. I must attack. Okay, let's start with rook to g5. I'm currently threatening a checkmate in one move, so he has to prevent this. I'm expecting knight to g3, but if he plays pawn g3, that's not too bad. But knight g3 would be the better way to defend in this position. After knight g3, I may play bishop to d6 to just get rid of his knight and double up the pawns, opening the h file. I also have to play with some speed, so let's immediately play knight to bishop to d6. He has 3 minutes, I have 4 minutes, so you could say I have some advantage on the clock. My rook guards this pawn. All my pieces are heading towards this king. So rook to d1, I was expecting that move. Take his knight, he takes back. Okay, let's take his knight first. He has to take back. He can't take my rook just yet because I have an in-between move. Now that he takes back, I have the h file. I'm trying to occupy the h file with my rook, but his rook is already here, which is very active. So I'm gonna. Do I want to exchange rooks though? Okay, maybe rook e7. Like once you're down in material, you don't want to be exchanging. Rook e7 seems like a passive move, but if I takes, then I don't see how my attack is going to be successful. So let's actually play rook e7. Not a comfortable move to play, but my plan is to play rook e8, rook h8, rook h5, rook h1 mate. It's a very slow plan though. So let's see. He has to be very precise here. Very, very precise. For example, rook to d8 would be smart, preventing my rook from going to e8. Okay, he plays rook to d3 instead, which is, I think that's a bit inaccurate. Rook to d8 was better because now he allows. Wait, if I play rook e8, he doubles up the rook. I play rook h8, he plays rook d7, I play rook h5. He has to, I don't know, he has to do something to prevent the mate. Maybe push one of his pawns or something, and then it's gonna at least gives me hope. So let's do that. Let's go rook to e8. So rook to d1, I play rook h8. Rook d7, I play rook h5. So rook h8, rook d7 attacks my queen. And then I play rook h5, threatening the mate. Think he has to play pawn to f3. Yo, and then I have a queen sacrifice. I have a brilliant queen sacrifice. If he plays f3, I sack the queen. The pawn takes, I check. King has to go here, and that's a mate. I told you about this attack. We're counter-attacking. Whenever you're down in material, do not trade pieces. You notice how my rook was on the file and I had to play some uncomfortable weird move? That's better than trading pieces. Okay, it doesn't mean that he has to play f3, by the way. So it's still not winning for me. Or maybe it's winning. Let's see. Because if he allows rook h5 and f3 is a blunder, if king h1, I check and then take on g2. So let's see. Plus, he has a minute on the clock. He did play rook to d1. Offense is the best defense. We do not move the queen. We play rook to h5, threatening a checkmate on h1. And now he's trying to run away with the king. Check, king up. Oh, the queen is threatening e6. I have to be very careful. The queen is threatening e6. Okay, let's check. King up. If I take on g2, he takes on e6. I have to protect the e6 square. Is it queen a6? So that way I'm able to play b4? Yeah, this is the critical point. If I take, the queen take, and I don't have a good check takes, check, king up. That's not mate. What do I play here? Oh, queen e4. Queen a6, maybe there's queen b4. But then I have, okay, let's try queen a6. Queen a6 guards e6, and I'm trying to play b4, a discovered attack. Rook takes f7, I did not think about. But if rook f7, I take. Rook to d6 attacks the queen. Okay, that's a good move. If I go, I could go back to b7 though. Okay, yeah, let's go back to b7 and attack this pawn. There's no more queen e6. If he goes back to d7, it shows that he's trying to draw the game, and I don't want to draw, even though I'm down by a pawn. Nice. He's comfortable with a draw. Let's go queen e4. Let's centralize the queen. I think he's more scared of my attack. Oh, but now he plays rook d4. There's no more queen e6. That's a pawn, bro. That's not a pawn. If I take, there's rook g4 and I lose. I have to prevent. Okay, let's go queen g6. We have to play fast. I have to prevent rook g4. Now he's trying to pin. If I check, block, takes. I think I'm going to take, and if he pins, yeah, let's just take. If he pins, I save the rook, and I'm going to have two rooks versus a queen. Two rooks are definitely better than a queen. So save this, and then once he takes, what? Okay, let's take with this. E4 hits the rook. Okay, let's go here. I need to keep this pawn guarded. He moves the queen. He blundered a pawn. Very good. He's not managing the time well. Okay, let's go back. I'm trying to go here. Okay, let's get my rook in the game. Very good. If he checks, I just move. Two rooks are better than a queen. See, I tell you guys. Okay, let's go here. It's 20 seconds each. Okay, let's push. Maybe f5. Okay, let's go f5. I'm trying to get to his king. Okay, now let's take. Still trying to get to the king. Let's give a check, then go back to d5. It's very important that the rooks are guarding each other. If the rooks don't protect each other, then you could be in trouble. King up, king up, king over, block the check. This is piece coordination 101. Let's hit the queen. Check, check. Good, good. Now we take here. Very nice. And he lost on time. More QGD against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. He plays d4, and we are going to be continuing with our Queen's Gambit decline. So, this is Queen's Gambit. E6 is the Queen's Gambit decline. Very, very solid setup. Remember what the goal is, it's to get the king castled in 5 moves. So, I should not be explaining this, too much. It's just bishop e7, castle the king. Whenever they take on d5, it means that we're going to be getting our king castled in 6 moves. Queen c2, let's get the king out the center of the board here. And then the opponent plays pawn to a3. Very interesting move. I think I've seen something like this where white tries to play g4 and then sack the pawn and then rook g1 and then try to play for an advantage. With that being said, we have to be a bit more active when it comes to getting our pieces out. We don't want to play c6 because a bishop is not on d3 in this scenario. So I'm going to try to develop my light squared bishop as quickly as possible. So now I'm going to play the move pawn to b6. And I'm sure you've seen me do this already where I put a pawn on b6, a bishop on b7, and a knight on d7. And then the opponent is going ultra aggressive with this move, pawn to e4. Now, he's breaking in the center of the board very early. Let's take on e4. The knight, I'm assuming, will take back. If I take the knight, the queen takes, it attacks my rook. We know that to take is a mistake, and we should only trade if it improves our position. So let me just use the time to develop my bishop. My bishop is now on a long diagonal, and I didn't really have to use too much effort to put it on a long diagonal. So I'm very happy about that. Because the opponent plays this bishop to d3 move, there is a battery on my h7 pawn. White is threatening to take on f6, and if I take with the bishop, he takes on h7. But once I put my knight on d7, if he takes on f6, my knight takes and h7 is guarded. So he castled the king. Now all my minor pieces are doing fine. It's time to get my major pieces in the game. And we all know when it comes to getting the major pieces in the game, we need to be thinking about pawn breaks. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. Pawn to c5, pawn break. The opponent immediately takes on c5. And I actually have a very nice idea here. Like before I just take on c5, because if I take on c5 with the knight no longer guards this knight. He takes on f6, and then the bishop takes on h7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on e4 first, allowing the bishop to takes, then take on e4 again. And only when the queen takes on e4, then I take with the knight, seeing that I'm gaining a tempo on the queen. So very, very nice idea. I mean, he should be able to play b4. I don't necessarily want him to play b4 here. And because I don't like the idea of him playing b4, I'm actually going to play the move bishop to f6, preventing b4. It's only temporarily preventing b4, though. I'm definitely expecting him to play rook to d1 and attack my queen. He did not go for that idea. He developed his bishop first, which is a very principled move to play. Immediately, I'm thinking about queen to d3, which could win me a pawn if I'm calculating correctly. Let's calculate. The queen is unprotected. The other move that I'm thinking of here is queen e7, by the way. He's still not able to play b4. I'm assuming after queen b7, there's rook to d1, and then it's a regular game. But if I play queen to d3, he's not able to take my queen because once I take with the knight, there's 2 pieces attacking his pawn, and I will be winning a pawn. So let's go with the idea of queen to d3. This will be one of those end games that I have to grind out if he takes. And you guys have to be careful seeing that it is 3 versus 2 in this position. Well, he decided to take. Is this not just a free pawn though? Like, how is he going to defend the pawn if I have 2 pieces attacking and he has no pieces defending? I guess we're already just winning a pawn. 16 moves in the QGD. Now remember though, your endgame skills has to be good. He plays rook to b1, taking with the bishop. I'm thinking about it, but I know I'm not going to do it because, he has rook to d1, attack my knight, the only defender of the bishop. So let's just take on b2. I'm ahead by a pawn. I'm also attacking the unprotected pawn on c4, which is why he played the move pawn to c5 here. And this is about to be very interesting because the position that immediately stood out to me was knight c4. If he takes, I take. And then once the bishop takes and I takes, and then he plays rook takes, I take on a3. But because it's 4 versus 3 on the same side, that could put me at risk of drawing the game. So I need to ensure that I keep the position complex in some ways. So The first way I'm thinking of in order to keep the position complex is just to take the pawn. The bishop takes, attack my rook, and then I attack the bishop. I'm also thinking of b5 here, but then he gets a pass pawn, and bishop to d1 attacks the knight. I will be forced to move the knight. Let's say knight back to c5, and then he plays rook take. So let's just take on c5. I want to win this game using, and basically I need pawns on both sides of the board. If the pawns are on one side of the board, not saying that I can't win this position, but it's going to be hard. My rook is under attack. Let's move the rook, attack the bishop. Bishop is forced to move. And these are actually both of us weakest pawn. Like, keep in mind that connected pawns are strong. So our pawns on the king side is connected. The disconnected pawns that is just sitting by themselves is weak. So I'm actually thinking of just pushing my pawn up to a4 here. Definitely need to get my rook in the game, but once he pulls his bishop back, my pawn on a7 will be under attack. Bishop d4 is definitely something that I think he could try. If bishop d4, I may just play knight to f6, just to change the structure a bit. If he doubles my pawn, I take back. That's what he does. So I could takes, knight takes, then knight c4, hit the pawn. Or I could immediately play knight. Oh, I think it's takes, knight c4. Because once I take and then his knight take, we're now in the end game, by the way. So the goal is to attack pawns. Hopefully, you guys know this. But now I play the move knight c4. I'm threatening the pawn and I'm threatening a fork. And I'm not saying that I'm going to be winning material here, but he just has to be careful. He has to ensure that the move he plays defend the pawn and the fork at the same time. For example, rook to a1. But then he puts his rook on a closed file and then I'm able to get control over the file. So that would be good for me. So he did play rook to a1. He immediately spot the idea. And now my plan is just to play rook to b1. I mean, it's an open file. I mean, there's not really much I could do. I could play e5 and attack his knight, but let's prioritize our piece activity here. This is going to be like an endgame masterclass. I really hope you guys pay attention. What I'm going to be displaying is actually endgame technique, not necessarily endgame theory. So he plays a4 because my knight was attacking the pawn and he doesn't want his rook to be tied down to defending a pawn. One thing I would love to do is to have both of my rooks on the 7th rank. That would be hard to do though. I'm thinking of playing knight d2, hit the rook move, knight b3, trade the knights off the board. And then once I trade the knights off the board, it will be easier for me to attack his a pawn. It also improves the likelihood that the game could end in a draw as well. So still have to be careful. I like the idea of playing rook to b4 here. It attacks the opponent's weak pawn. It puts the rook on the same line as the knight, and I'm threatening some moves like knight b3, hits the knight, hits the pawn. So let's go with rook to b4 in this position. Now, how do I have 3 minutes on the clock? Do I have 3 minutes on the clock? I have to play fast. So he plays immediate rook to b1. I'm thinking of just playing a5 here. Because then if he takes, I take, and I get the pass pawn, he also gets the pass pawn. So it's a very tricky situation. Okay, why not just rook to b1? Maybe just rook b1. Takes. Yeah, let's start with rook to b8. No, rook b8, takes, knight c6. Hit the rook and the pawn. Okay, this is going to be very complex position. Takes, rook takes. Let's play a5. A5 is asking for complication and asking for trouble. I get the pass pawn. He also gets the pass pawn. And it's going to be a very fast pass pawn. So let's see. These are usually the type of positions that you see Magnus try to grind out where he's just ahead by a pawn or the position is equal and he's just still trying to win the game. I think the best thing for him to do is to just take and start rolling his pawn up the board. He did not do that though. He did not do that. So I'm thinking of just playing immediate e5 to hit the knight, or just knight b2 is strong. Yo, wait. If knight b2, there is rook a2 though, and if I take on a4, he takes my rook, then take the knight. So do I play e5 knight c2? e5 knight c2, or do I play rook b8 here? Rook b8 takes. Okay, it's tricky. It's still very tricky. Knight to d2 hits the rook. If he takes, I takes. And then if he roll his pawn, I'm able to roll my pawn. If he attacks the knight, however, okay, maybe I'm going to play if I just have to play fast. I forgot that my time is running out. I only have 2 minutes on the clock. So knight c2 is definitely the best move because knight c2 basically forces me to trade the rooks, which is not bad, you know? Let's just trade the rooks. Now his rook gets the open file. I'm thinking of playing knight d2 to hit the rook. But then he's just going to move the rook. So let's play f6 first, so that way my king gets little locked. We're in the end game, so we also have to ensure that we get our king active. Like king activation is crucial in the end game, and not rushing is also crucial. Now, I'm definitely going to be rushing, but not in terms of trying to win quickly. I'm going to rush because I only have 2 minutes on the clock, which is crazy. Like, I'm still not okay. Rook b5 is good. He's attacking the weak pawn. Knight d6 attacks the rook and the knight. Okay, let's go knight d6. His knight is under attack. I'm also attacking his rook. So he pull his rook back to guard the knight. Let's play rook to c4, attacking the weak pawn. And then he plays rook a2 to guard the pawn. And I'm really liking this position, by the way. Let's go knight e4 with ideas of playing knight to c5. He hits the rook. Okay, where do I put the rook? Okay, let's start by playing rook to e5 here. If I'm able to play knight c3, then I will be winning. So knight f5 hits the rook. What if I play knight c3 and counter-attack his rook? And then he attacks my knight, though. Okay, now I'm going to play rook to b5. His knight is not able to attack my rook anymore. I'm threatening to play knight c5 or knight c3. He pulls his knight back. No, only now, I hit him with knight c3, and that's a fort. So it looks like we're winning the d5 pawn. He moves the rook. We grab the pawn. Very complex position. He moves the knight. Let's hit the knight. The thing is, if I move my knight, I'm losing this pawn. So all he needs to do is attack my pawn with his knight. I have to quickly get my king in the game, like very quickly. Okay, let's very, very quickly get the king in the game. Okay, he hits the rook. Let's just move. Okay, let's just quickly get the king in the game. If I'm able to, okay, he hits this pawn. Let's play here, hit the knight. I don't know how my time is this low. Okay, now I play here. My king is getting in the game, which is good. One thing you guys need to keep in mind is forks. Watch out for the forks. Okay, now my king guards the pawn. Good. Now I'm able to move my knight. This is endgame technique. So if he checks, I block the check, and then I'm going to be rolling the pawn. Okay, let's block the check. I'm ahead by 2 pawns. Assuming he's going to move the rook, I go here, hit the rook, prevent his rook from going on my second rank. And now I roll the pawn. Okay, can't do that. Let's go here. I'm threatening to roll the pawn. He's not able to take this, obviously. He attacks the rook. Maybe I just push, takes. No, that doesn't work. Let's check and then push. Good. Yeah, we have to roll the pawn. 19 seconds, man. Oh, 19 seconds. Let's roll the pawn, though. It's over. What is this guy doing? He made it so easy for me. Okay, now I just need to not get flagged. Okay, we have to pre-move some stuff here, though. Okay, let's go here. He's definitely going to be checking my king. Okay, let's pre-move. We have to pre-move. 11 seconds should be enough time to win. Now I pre-move here. And then I need to get my... Okay, let's go here. Then I need to pre-move my knight. Oh, his rook and his knight is under attack. He's in trouble. He's in trouble. He's trying to flag me. Yo, this is crazy. Now we take rook to... Okay, let's go here. If he takes, it's over. That's a checkmate. More QGD against 2,000 level players. Stick around. The opponent is now 2,000. D4 was played. Let's play pawn to D5. This is the Queen's Gambit. And as we said, we're going to be playing the Queen's Gambit decline. We're not going to be accepting the Gambit. Bishop to F4. That's definitely a new move, but we know the drill. Let's develop the knight, develop the bishop, get the king out the center of the board, and only then we start thinking about the queenside pieces. So let's develop the bishop. He plays e3. Let's get our king out the center of the board. Now, our king is castled by the fifth move. And a good way to know that you're playing well is your king is castled by move 5. Now that the bishop goes to d3, we're going to be using the idea where we play pawn to c6. And yes, I know it looks weird, like I'm literally just blocking my bishop, but just remember the whole idea to get the light squared bishop out, where we first take on c4, so that way the opponent moves the bishop more than once, and then we play pawn to b5, so that way our bishop gets access to the b7 square. Bishop went back to d3. Now we play bishop to d7. And this does not mean we solve the issue of our bishop, by the way. This only means that we're developing, because if what white needs to do in these types of position is to prevent me from playing c5. If white could prevent me from playing c5 the entire game, then my bishop is not going to be activated. And now if I play c5, he's going to simply take on b5. So I'm actually just going to play knight d7, just finishing my development first. He plays rook to c1. He's like, okay, I'm going to be controlling the c5 square a lot, so that way you're not able to play pawn c5. But let's just play pawn a6 here. Pawn c5 is the move that I would love to play next. He plays a3, which was definitely not necessary. He needed to play something like knight b3 or knight e4 just to prevent c5. Because now once I play c5, if you guys have a look on my position, all my pieces are actually very active here. And please, 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 we're at the end of the King's Gambit video. Ensure that you're aware of how to get your light squared bishop in the game. Because if you're not able to get your light squared bishop in the game, you could have some crazy games where you're playing the entire game and you were just not able to use your light squared bishop. And if you look on the position now, my light squared bishop is actually one of my best pieces. I'm also attacking his light squared bishop, which he pulls back to b1. And the move that I'm thinking of, which I'm not going to play, is knight d3. Looks like a fork, but after takes, rook c7, I'm the one who's getting forked. Now, what I want to do is I want to have one rook on d8, one rook on c8. So let's just move the queen to b6, so that way I'm able to put my rook on the same line as his queen. The only move that I'm afraid of in this position is, okay, never mind, I'm not afraid of it. I thought I was afraid of b4, but I am able to play knight a4. Maybe you could say I'm slightly afraid of it, because who wants their knight on the edge of the board? But I thought I had to pull my knight back and then bishop to c7. Wait, wait, back up. b4, knight a5, was bishop c7 trapping my queen? I'm not sure, but let's keep going. So knight d4 was played. Now I need to get my pieces on the open files. Rook to c8 is what I'm leaning towards, because this b4 idea is very, very strong. Not sure what the knight is doing on d4, so let's play rook to c8. Let's put the rook on the open file. Let's go rook to d8 is what I'm going to be playing next. And again, I do not have any intention of attacking the opponent's king right now. He plays pawn to h3, which appears to be like a waiting move, because I wasn't able to play knight h5 anyways. But let's keep getting all our pieces in the game. Let's play rook to d8. Every single pieces are now active. This is like a setup that you guys want to have. He plays pawn to b4, and now I have to move my knight. The good thing is bishop to c7 is not a possibility, because my rook covers the square. Knight e4 is not possible. Or is it? Knight e4 takes, and I'm fine, right? So why not just knight e4? The whole time I thought I had to play knight a4. But I like knight a4 though, that's the thing. Because knight a4 does not force too many pieces off the board. And I still threaten to play knight c3. But I think knight e4 is just a more principled approach. Knight e4 takes. Is it guaranteed that my knight is going to b3 next? Nah. So let's go knight e4. It's not guaranteed. If it's not guaranteed that you're going to be moving your knight off the edge of the board, then don't put it on the edge of the board. Because c3 is where I want to put my knight. And if I don't get to put my knight on c3, at least I could say my knight is still in the center of the board. Rook takes c8 doesn't really change much. Pawn to e5 is an idea. It doesn't work, but it's an idea. He took. Let's just take back with the knight. Knight c3 could happen in some lines. Pawn e5 I would love to play if I'm able to protect the e5 square. But otherwise, all my pieces are very actively played. So this is kind of how my more solid players should be playing the line. I mean, the King's Indian defense is more aggressive against d4. But if you think you're a more solid player, then you could play this line, or you could just mix both of them at the same time. Okay, the opponent gave up his bishop for a knight. Let's take. The only time when you see the opponent plays moves like these, I'm actually worried, because why would he allow me to have such a strong bishop? Is there a tactic that I'm missing? Let's see. If there's no tactic that I'm missing, then giving up the bishop for a knight was not good. And then he plays queen e2, so there's no tactic that I was missing. Now I want to get my bishop on the c4 square. That would be a very nice skewer. But bishop d5, he's definitely going to be playing rook d1 next. But the whole idea of bishop c4 is to, not trade too many pieces off the board. Bishop to f6, I also like because it threatens e5 and it threatens to chase his knight out the center of the board. So let's actually go with, okay, there's also bishop to d6. But let's go with bishop to f6. I'm not necessarily trying to trade all the pieces off the board. Now I have one, two, three pieces attacking the knight. He only has one piece guarding the knight. So he could be forced to move the knight. And whenever the opponent has a knight that is in the center of the board, it's usually good to try to chase the knight away from the center. And then he moves the knight, and this is where he made his first. Okay, it's actually not a mistake. I thought bishop to d3 was winning, but rook takes c8. Okay, okay, okay. Wait. Bishop to d3, queen takes d3, rook takes the queen, he takes my rook, and then I block the check. I'm not losing. Bishop to d3. He takes the rook first. I take the queen. He takes and I take back. I'm not losing. Oh, it's actually winning. Bishop to d3. This is called a skewer, guys, where you move your bishop to a square, or not the bishop, any piece, but you force the opponent's strong piece to move so that way you're able to take. But let's do it quickly. Like my time is so low. My time is so low. If he sack the queen and then take the rook, then he's gonna have a rook and a bishop, which is 8 points, versus a queen, which is 9 points. So it doesn't mean I'm completely winning. But he decided to just give me the rook, which means now I'm ahead by 2 points and not just 1 point. So I think this is actually a easier way for me to play. He should have actually sacrificed the queen, which is crazy. Now that he took with the rook, my plan from here is just to get the pieces off the board. If I'm able to get the pieces off the board, then it's going to be an easier game for me to play. Knight to c5 is coming, and knight to c5 is going to be very, very annoying. Let's just play queen to c6 here. If you're winning in material, if you have more material than the opponent, just trade the queens off the board and you're going to have a very comfortable game. I actually knew that he wanted to play this whole knight c5 idea. I'm thinking about a5, but knight to b2 would be too much to handle. Okay, let's just play let's go bishop e7. I need to play faster. Okay, let's go bishop to e7. I'm trying to get rid of the knight. And if I have the option of do I give up my bishop for the knight or do I trade bishops, I'm actually going to be giving up my bishop for the knight. Rook to c1. Rook to c1 actually does not work here. It's going to be very hard for me to win. Wait. Do I just play f6, e5 and I'm just locking his bishop out the game? Like takes, f6, takes, rook over, bishop here. And then I play a5 and I just win the game. a5, push. Okay, this is winning as well. Takes, pawn takes, rook to c8 is just winning because that's a free pawn. Bishop to d6 loses the bishop. So let's do that. I mean, if you're winning in material, you want to trade the pieces off the board anyways. He took, let's just go here. And we're just going to be taking this pawn on the next move. We knew he couldn't have played bishop to d6, but he basically missed it. This is just a tactic that you guys need to be aware of. Like, his rook is unprotected, and because I have two rooks on the file, I'm actually able to just capture his bishop. And if he takes my rook, I'm going to take his unprotected rook. And if he moves his rook, my rook goes over and take his pawn. So now I'm just ahead by an entire rook, and now I'm just going to be winning the game. And if you guys are going to be choosing to play like more solid games, you have to ensure that your end game is very, very strong. So he's not trying to trade the rooks, but if you're winning, you want to force the rooks off the board. So I'm going to play the move rook to c1, forcing the rooks off the board. He has to take. Let's just take back. He moves the king. And all I need to do from here is just to take his pawns, queen my, well, the opponent resigns.